We've got everybody checked in and ready to roll.
Go ahead, you're open to both.
3,
Put it over the slate now.
2, 1. Take camera 1. Go, Jonathan.
Welcome to Washington Post Live.
That was quite an intro. My gosh, we should probably just leave it right there.
I've hit the big time. Washington Post. I can go home and tell my parents what I did today.
Between Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Washington Post Live itself, we are now reaching hundreds of thousands of homes across all 50 states.
The power of this platform is it takes people into the world of ideas.
Audience members of Washington Post Live are part of the conversation.
Audience or viewer question from George Kralovic from Virginia asks, now that we have the Inflation Reduction Act, do we still need a price on carbon?
Whether it's with cancer scientists or politicians.
This panel, I think, was originally called, 2 women against Putin. It really should be 3 women against Putin. And so
the better way to get things done, as I've demonstrated, is by putting a group together and negotiating something that's good for both points of view.
I think Washington Post Live has given us as a newspaper a new platform, a common meeting ground.
When they're sitting in their own space, there is a sense of ownership and comfort.
It's great that you guys have expanded into these formats to give people a greater ability to have a longer conversation. So I look forward to talking to you today.
And their individuality comes through more so than just their title.
Thank you for being the agents and the warriors of the light and truth.
That is the lock from the night of the burglary.
Jeff Bezos bought it at an auction.
Right.
And we're trying to find out how much Bezos paid.
Right. Come back next week.
I'm so grateful to be on a platform like the Washington Post. I subscribe, I read, I love the Washington Post.
Thank you.
We need films like this. So thank you very much. Stephen, Lynn, it's been great to talk to you.
Thank you, Michelle. Big fan. Thanks for talking to us.
I cannot thank you all enough.
Good morning. Welcome to the Washington Post. I'm Christina Pesariello, the Post's Deputy Business Editor for Technology and Personal Finance. I'm so delighted you can be here with us today for some fascinating conversations and revelations about artificial intelligence. This has been a year marked by headlines about the promise and perils of AI and Washington's efforts to keep up. Even though AI has been around for decades, new breakthroughs in generative AI have the world talking about how it might reshape our democracy and our economy. Today, you'll hear from some of the most powerful voices driving the future of artificial intelligence, including Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, who's leading the bipartisan charge in Congress for AI regulation. Arati Prabhakar, the director of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, one of President Biden's top advisors. Alexandr Wang, founder and CEO of Scale AI, a billion-dollar company now working with the Pentagon. And many more key players across this dynamic AI landscape. Whether you are here with us in the room or watching online, it is our hope that we will all leave here today with a deeper understanding of the role artificial intelligence plays as it continues to reshape our world today and moves to define our future tomorrow. Before we get started, we'd like to thank our presenting sponsors, Intel and IBM. We're so excited for today's summit, which we've been preparing for the past few months. And we have flown in some of the Post's top tech journalists from San Francisco to moderate many of these conversations, along with some of our top journalists from right here in the nation's capital. First up, we are going to kick off the summit with a live demonstration by my colleague Jeffrey Fowler, our San Francisco-based tech columnist, after a short video. Stay right here. Trust me, you won't want to miss this.
generative AI can authoritatively deliver wildly incorrect information. It can hallucinate, as is often described. It can impersonate loved ones. It can encourage self-destructive behaviors, and it can shape public opinion and the outcome of elections.
Workers, kids, consumers, and national security. As AI develops, we've got to make sure that we have safeguards in place that will ensure this new technology is actually good for the American people.
I believe strongly in the power of elections. I also believe in innovation, and we have got to be able to draw that line to allow voters to vote and make good decisions, while at least putting the guardrails in place.
We need to be the leaders in the international community, and we have the opportunity. We're there now. We don't want to lose that, and that means that we become the place where we create, but we also share in many cases with the rest of the world. That maintains our leadership.
Make no mistake, the risks of AI on our elections is not just an issue for Democrats nor just Republicans. Every one of us will be impacted. No voter will be spared. No election will be unaffected. It will spread to all corners of democracy, and thus it demands a response from all of us.
Hello and welcome to the Washington Post. My name is Jeff Fowler. I write the tech column here at the Post. My job is to advocate for the users of technology, which means all of you here in the audience and everybody watching online. One thing I love to do in my columns is run experiments. So I'd like to run an experiment with all of you today. I want to see if we can use some of the latest and most advanced AI technology to recreate the likeness of someone. Perhaps someone like Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer. Hello, Senator Schumer. Welcome to the Washington Post. This is going to be fun. We hope, yes. Okay, so everybody is here because you know AI is important, but you might not have personally gotten the chance yet to use generative AI tools and see what they're capable of. So Senator Schumer has very kindly agreed to let us use his likeness in the name of journalism to see what AI is capable of and also talk about what it means for our democracy. So, okay, about a year ago, the world got a new generative AI tool called Midjourney. What can Midjourney do? Midjourney is capable of kind of creating an image of anything. When I say anything, I mean, what if we send Senator Schumer into orbit? I made this earlier. We have here Senator Schumer on the US space station. You'll notice the label that we put across the image. This is part of our standard here at the Washington Post to help our readers and viewers navigate this new world of AI-generated media. Okay, so how do you make one of these? Well, it's really as simple as typing in some words. So here's some words that I typed in for another experiment earlier. I typed fisheye lens photo of Senator Chuck Schumer as an astronaut walking on the surface of Mars. Can we send Senator Schumer to Mars? Let's see. What do you think? What do you like it?
I don't think I like it there.
Yeah, I don't think it. Well, you know, the problem is, Senator, I forgot to type into my prompt that you needed a helmet so that you could breathe. But other than that, you do seem to be, it's a nice view up there from Mars. Hey, you're up there in space. So hey, you know what? Let's make one of these together. I'm going to pop over to my laptop here. All right. Can you guys see what I've got on my screen? All right. So to use Midjourney, the main interface is the system called Discord. Now, if you don't know what Discord is, ask your kids. But basically, Discord is a giant social network that's also a chat system. But in this case, I'm going to be chatting with an AI, not with other people. So to make it go, what I do is I type imagine. So let me go in here and type imagine. That's the keyword. That's literally what you tell the AI to make a picture of anything. Okay, let's see. We're going to tell it to imagine a photo of Senator Chuck Schumer. Okay, how much trouble can I get into today? Cuddling not just a. Shall we do kittens or puppies? Yeah, kittens. Kittens. The internet is made of cats. All right, shall we do it? Press and go. While the AI is thinking about how to do this, you might wonder, how on earth is this possible? Well, the folks in who made Midjourney they went around the internet and they found hundreds of millions of images to teach their AI what Senator Schumer looks like and what a kitten looks like. They found lots of pictures of both. Oh, look at this. This is so cute. All right, I really like this fourth one. So I'm going to tell it to upscale this fourth one by pressing U4. While that's going, you also might be wondering, hey, are there any guardrails on this system? Can you ask it to literally make anything? And the answer is there are some things you can't type into the system, but those do not include the names of US senators. What do you think, Senator Schumer? New official Senate portrait? Not bad? Oh, not bad? The cat lovers are there. Now, I think some of these cats might have extra arms, which is one of the downsides, the kinks they're working out in the technology. If we could go back to my slides, I want to show folks that actually, oh, well, sorry, I forgot to show this one earlier. Check out the detail, by the way, on his face on Mars. Sorry, I forgot to mention that earlier. But yeah, I made a lot of pictures of Senator Schumer with cats earlier. So please enjoy some of those. But hey, there's a lot more at stake here with AI than just kittens, right? What if somebody wanted to mislead voters about Senator Schumer? What if they wanted people to think that he had maybe lost some of his marbles and made a really interesting endorsement for President of the United States? What if somebody wanted people to think that Senator Schumer had endorsed Spider-Man for President of the United States? So I made this image earlier. We see our two favorite New Yorkers finally coming to terms about who should be leading this great nation of ours. And I made this in Midjourney just as easily as the other images I showed you earlier. Now, this is pretty good proof on the internet of what's happening, but maybe we could go a step further. What if we had a speech from Senator Schumer written in his style, sounds like it's from him, telling people he had endorsed Spider-Man for president? How would we do that? Let's go back to my computer. All right, gonna switch here to ChatGPT. Does anybody not know what ChatGPT is? If so, welcome back from your coma. It is a chatbot that can write in the style of a human being or even Senator Schumer. So let's ask it to write a speech. Write a short speech in the style of Senator Chuck Schumer endorsing Spider-Man for president. Here we go. Pressing go. Let's let the AI do its work. Today I stand before you not just as a senator from New York, but as a proud New Yorker. Let's scroll up here a little bit. And who better epitomizes the spirit of our great city than our very own friendly neighborhood Spider-Man? I am honored and excited to endorse Spider-Man for President of the United States. Pretty good, sounds kind of like him. What do you think, Senator? Would you approve of this speech? Not bad. So we've still got a couple of minutes left. How much more trouble can I get into here today? Wouldn't it be even more convincing if we had this speech read in a clip of Senator Schumer's own voice? How would we do that? Let me show you. So there's another tool that came out earlier this year called 11 Labs. 11 Labs lets you take the voice of anyone and clone it very quickly and have it say whatever you want. Let's try. So I'm going to go over to 11 Labs here, and I'm going to say, create a voice, right? So to do that, I found an original clip of Senator Schumer talking at a press conference. I'm going to upload that to the system. It's about 2 minutes. That's all it takes, 2 minutes of his voice. Then I'm going to say, Schumer, give it a name. Then at the bottom here, I do have to click a box saying I'm not doing anything naughty. That box is doing a lot of work here. Perhaps we'll talk about that during some of our sessions later today, but I do have his permission for now. Add voice. And the AI is learning to speak like they're from New York in the voice of Senator Schumer, and it's done. That easy. So I'm just going to go back over to ChatGPT, get a little bit of his speech, take it back to 11 Labs. Now I'm going to use it. I'm going to type at the top, This is an artificial intelligence version of Senator Chuck Schumer. Did I spell that right? Nope. Sorry, this is live journalism. All right, then I'm going to paste in some of the speech, and let's generate. The AI is trained to try to learn from the words the emotion to express. Let's see how well it does. Go internet squirrels, live journalism.
This is an artificial intelligence version of Senator Chuck Schumer. Today I stand before you not just as a senator from New York, but as a proud New Yorker. And who better epitomizes the spirit of our great city than our very own friendly neighborhood, Spider-Man? I am honored and excited to endorse Spider-Man for President of the United States.
What do you think? Sound like Senator Schumer? Would you be tricked if you saw it on TikTok? Since we have a little bit more time, I want to get even sillier. Let's try one other thing. Let's have Senator Schumer's voice deliver that speech in Spanish. I'm going to go over to ChatGPT. I'm going to ask it, translate that into Spanish. Press go. Go internet squirrels. Scrolling down. Senator, do you actually speak Spanish? No. Well, you're about to. Okay. All right. I'm going to take the juicy bit. Copy that in. Go back to 11 Labs. And scroll down. Let's listen.
¿Y quién mejor encarna el espíritu de nuestra gran ciudad que nuestro propio vecino amigable, Spider-Man? Es un honor y un placer respaldar a Spider-Man para presidente de los Estados Unidos.
This is not just a theoretical possibility, folks. Last week, we learned that the mayor of New York, Eric Adams, has been sending robocalls to New Yorkers in Spanish, Urdu, Yiddish, and Mandarin Chinese, languages that he does not speak, using the exact same software that I just used to mimic Senator Schumer. The question is, how do we feel about that? Is the mayor of New York misleading potential future voters? I'd like to ask and leave folks here today with an even bigger question. Look, if I could do all of this on stage with you in a matter of minutes, what could someone do if they really wanted to disturb our democracy, sow confusion and chaos? What are we going to do about that? Well, Senator Schumer and other leaders in Congress, as well as the Federal Election Commission, have been discussing ways that we can put guardrails in place. But look, they've got a lot to balance in this, right? There are First Amendment rights. It is not against the law for politicians to lie in the United States, including if they use AI to do it. So it's not clear if or when we might get guardrail laws on using AI in our elections. Perhaps that's something Senator Schumer can address when he comes up next. So I want to leave us with something to think about today, and that is, look, the 2024 election is here. The first AI election is here. What are we going to do about that? I actually have a column that I ran in the Post this morning, I suggest everybody read it, where I propose a kind of AI pledge for elected officials and folks who are going to be running for office this year. In that pledge, I basically say, hey, don't lie to voters using AI about what your opponent has said or done, or what you have said or done. Also, if you are going to use AI to make something, label it so that the world can know. Look, generative AI isn't going anywhere. That means we're going to have to figure out how to use it and live with it responsibly. And with that, I'd like to welcome to the stage Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and my colleague Leanne Caldwell.
Great job.
Thank you. Good job.
Thank you.
So I am the real Chuck Schumer. I promise. As they say in Brooklyn, for better or for worse.
Thanks, Jeff. That was fantastic. I'm Leanne Caldwell. I am the anchor of Washington Post Live, also co-author of the Early 202 newsletter. Senator Schumer, thank you so much for being such a great sport.
It's great.
And
it's fun.
Sitting through that. But I want to get your reaction to that. What are you thinking?
Well, we've realized this. I mean, the ability of AI to interfere with our elections, to spread misinformation that's extremely believable, is one of the things that's preoccupying us as we go through our actions at our AR group and within the Congress. Lots of people in the Congress are examining this. Excuse me. Sorry.
Always the flip phone.
Mr. Tech.
So you have created a bipartisan working group on this. You have been a leader on this issue, trying to prioritize it. There was just a new forum on Tuesday. What came out of it, and what happens next?
Well, the first thing we want to look, just as Jeff's little example showed, he wants to have a pledge of candidates. And maybe most candidates will make that pledge. But the ones that won't will drive us to a lower common denominator. And that's true throughout AI. In other words, there's so much good that could come out of AI, but there's also so much harm. And if we don't have government-imposed guardrails, the lowest common denominator will prevail. And in our first forum, which had leaders of all different viewpoints, there were tech leaders and there were people who were sort of anti-AI. Let's curb it.
And to remind, this was the forum with Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, and a whole
But there was one
players.
consensus that government had to be involved, and that was sort of our goal. We have to keep this bipartisan, and that's why we have a group of 4 of us sort of leading this. Myself, Senator Rounds, he's been a great partner, Senator Young, who I worked on the Chips and Science bill with, and Senator Heinrich, who was head of our little AI group in the Senate. And we had to keep it bipartisan. But we also had to sort of send a sort of lightning bolt through Congress and the country that we have to do something. The second forum, which we had yesterday, said not only should government be involved, but it needs significant resources, and a broad spectrum of people on the panel agreed that that should be, including our Republican friends. The minimum number that was talked about was $32 billion. And
to invest in for what?
Invest in many different things, and that's part of the goal of the forum, to figure out where to invest and where not to, how to encourage the private sector in places to go forward, because with these huge databases, if you want to have more than just a few companies have access, it may be the federal government that has to be involved in either creating the database or at least bringing data together so that people have access. You need real involvement, federal involvement. And the other thing that came out, Leanne, is you had to move quickly. China's moving very fast here. They're investing lots of money. And they're doing it in a different way. They don't have the same kind of values that we have. You know, they're putting a lot of focus on facial recognition, on following people around. If we don't move forward, it will lead to not only a different dominant system of AI with different values, but we'll fall behind economically rather dramatically. So we've really made great progress in terms of now getting a bipartisan consensus. A, the federal government should be involved. B, we need significant resources. And now we're beginning to figure out the best places to use those resources.
So just to recap, federal investment to ensure that the United States is a leader in AI, but also at the same time, there needs to be some guardrails around it. So have you all figured out that balance yet?
Well, that is one of the key questions. Innovation should be our North Star. We should encourage innovation. But innovation should be on both sides of the ledger. In other words, in encouraging the new cures for cancer, or ending world hunger, or dealing with our national security. But it also should be involved in creating the guardrails. And there, government probably has more of a role. The private sector will be pretty good at finding out the good stuff. But in preventing the bad stuff, you really need guardrails. And you need some kind of federal investment in how to figure out those guardrails. You know, one word that's used, but it's very important and there's not really been the breakthrough on that yet, is explainability. In other words, when you use AI, when you ask a system to spit back something, they should explain where it came from. Where did that picture of Chuck Schumer come from? Why did he say this? And where did that come from? That can break, if we can really discover, figure out how explainability can be accessible to the average user, you can have major success in creating guardrails and giving the consumer great information as to what they need. I mean, for instance, you know, if you go online and you find this diet that says eat a lot of hot dogs, oh, and it's very convincing because it's looked at what you think and why you like hot dogs and encourage you to eat hot dogs. But then if you learn, oh, all the information came from Oscar Mayer, Inc., you sort of know what's going on. That's what explainability is, simply put.
So transparency. Is the United States too far behind? Did they miss an opportunity?
We're still ahead. We're still significantly ahead. And you know, the great thing about America, in a certain sense, is we're entrepreneurial. We encourage new thinking, and we have many different universities and other places that invest, companies. That gives us a big advantage over China. But if they're going to put tens of billions of dollars into figuring this out and we're not going to do anything, and you know, the days are over, given competitiveness among companies, when they have, you know, we used to have a Bell Labs. They had a monopoly and they put a lot of money into pure research to figure out questions that don't immediately affect their profitability. We don't have that anymore. If the government doesn't do it, no one will. So, you know.
Well, we talked about this after the AI forum, sat with you, and anyway, we had a previous discussion a few weeks ago. One of the things that you said then is, as far as regulation is concerned, you almost don't want to move too fast. Do you still believe that? Has the EU moved too fast?
Look, this is one of the hardest things, maybe the hardest thing that Congress could ever approach. AI is complicated. At one of our forums, Eric Schmidt said, I don't understand these algorithms. Well, if he doesn't, how are we going to do that? Second, it affects everything. It's not just one segment of society that's affected. Third, it's rapidly evolving. And fourth, Congress doesn't have the history. You know, you look at defense or health, there's a long history of what's going on and familiarity with the granularity of it. A little less so with AI, a lot less so. That's one of the reasons we're having these forums, to help provide some of that granularity. But so that makes it hard, very hard to do. But we have to do it. If you move too quickly in this, you may screw it up. The EU went very fast, and now they're backing off because they realize they made a lot of mistakes. So that's another, there are so many needles to thread. Threading the needle between encouraging the good innovation, but having guardrails that prevent bad innovation and not having the one unbalance the other. But another is, do you move too fast? Do you move too slowly? What I have basically said, and I've stuck with this, I think, when I talked to you before, Leanne, it's not going to be days or weeks before we put out, you know, proposals, but it's not going to be years either. We have to do it in sort of months type time. And I would say this, we have to approach this with a degree of humility, because it is so hard. And you know, I was advised by lots of people, don't get involved, it's going to be next to impossible. But you know, as Theodore Roosevelt said, we're in the arena. If we don't do it, who is going to do it? And so we have to approach it in a way that we don't get left behind, but at the same time, we don't move so fast that we screw it up. And I think we're on a good track, and that's why we're going to have 2 more forums. This is a little news I'll make. On November 1st, we're going to have 2 different forums. In the morning on workforce. One of the great problems people bring up with AI, average folks, are we going to lose millions of jobs? How do we deal with that issue? We made a big mistake with globalization. Globalization, it may have increased international wealth, but millions of people were hurt by it, and we didn't pay any attention to it at that point. Can't do that. And so workforce is important, and that's positive and negative. How do we train people? Because there's going to be millions of new jobs that are created by AI, but also how do we deal with people who might lose their jobs because of AI? And the second one is high impact. There are areas right now where AI is having an effect, finance, healthcare, that kind of stuff. And they're having an effect on people. Are they doing it in the right way, or is there bias? You know, because there's built-in bias in the databases because of decades at least, or centuries of discrimination and all of that. And so we're going to have to look at those things. And we will have a forum rather soon on election reform. And that's the one we may have to move the most quickly on, because the elections are coming up.
So are you willing to move separately on any sort of election-related legislation overseeing AI? And could it be done before the 2024 election and implemented?
That is a great question. In terms of the second, I think we have no choice. We have to do, and again, humility. We can't let the perfect be the enemy good. If we can't solve every problem, watermarking is an easy way to do it. Like Mr. Fuller did up there. He had a big watermark at the top of each of my little astronaut and kittens and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And, but explainability is harder. Guardrails that prevent real deception are harder. We're going to try to move quickly. Whether we move it separately or not remains to be determined. It depends how quickly we can move on other pieces. And I have said, if we can't solve every problem in AI, but we can solve some of them, or attempt to solve some of them, again, humility, who knows if we will, let's hope so, we shouldn't hold back. So we'll have to see. But, as I said, by months, we got to have legislation, and the election need to deal with election reform and making sure our elections are not so totally jaundiced or perverted that no one believes anything anymore, is a top, quick priority.
Senator Klobuchar has election-related AI legislation. Is that the way to go, or is there other ideas out there?
Just a general point.
Yeah.
So our forums are not to replace the committees, but to augment the committees, to give them the information and have them ask the right questions when they do the legislation. But we intend the actual legislation to be in the different committees. And I've had great discussions with Senator Klobuchar. She's a very capable legislator about she has the Rules Committee, and the Rules Committee governs elections. She's the chair, and Fisher from Nebraska is the ranking Republican. And they are talking about what can be done. Good news here, Leader McConnell has encouraged his Republican members to participate and get involved. So at the moment, we are not in any kind of partisan loggerheads over this. And I was sort of relieved that yesterday, when the panel seemed to indicate we needed significant amount of dollars, because there's no way to do this without significant amount of dollars, there was broad bipartisan consensus that we needed it.
The job issue, the workforce issue. There are all sorts of different points of view on how problematic that could be. Where do you stand? Do you even have an opinion about it, or what?
Sort of like the whole conundrum of AI. Tremendous opportunity and tremendous potential problems. You got to deal with both. And there was some talk, a lot of talk there at our both the first forum and the second, about how to train people for the various jobs. And this is not just PhDs in, computer science, but the, people even with a high school degree or a community college degree who will be needed as AI expands in certain areas, many areas.
What keeps you up at night regarding AI, if anything?
Everyone talks about the doomsday scenarios, and there are some people who worry about that, and we're going to look at that for sure. But I guess there is such revolutionary change that is happening so much more quickly than, say, the electricity revolution or the steam revolution a century before that, even quicker than the sort of internet connectivity revolution, that the pace of change is so fast. How is humanity going to keep up? That's what worries me, broadly speaking. And you can look at it in specific areas, or you can look at it more generally.
Is that something that Congress can do something about?
Well, guardrails can help direct us in the right way, but that's why I said humility. This is difficult, but so important. Certainly, if we do nothing, the outcomes will be worse than if we do something that's decent.
My colleagues reported yesterday that President Biden is going to introduce an executive order regarding AI and workforce issues, immigration issues on Monday. Is the White House and the president, do they realize how important this issue is, and are they doing enough?
Okay, first question is, the answer is yes, they do. We're in constant touch with them, and they've been very encouraging of what I have been doing and our little group of 4 has been doing. We're going to meet with them pretty soon, with the president. As for the second question, so there's probably a limit to what you can do by executive order.
Mm-hmm.
We need to fund there are proposals that actually have passed into law to help us deal with AI, but it hasn't been funded. They can't just come up with the funds. So on the second, they're concerned and they're doing a lot regulatorily, but everyone admits the only real answer is legislative.
There is a Republican House of Representatives within.
So I've heard.
They have a brand new Speaker of the House. I'm not sure if you've spoken with him yet.
I did last night.
You did? How was
Yeah.
that conversation?
Nice. Look, I told him what I've been saying to everybody. I want to work with you. Let's work together.
Mm-hmm.
But the only way we're going to solve any of these problems, AI, we're on a great bipartisan track here in the Senate. But everything, whether it's, funding the government or dealing with Ukraine or Israel or all these other issues in terms, of a big, broad bill,
Mm-hmm.
you can only do it bipartisan. You can only do it bipartisan. And Boehner and Ryan and McCarthy learned that lesson the hard way. And so I hope that this new speaker understands that. He cannot get things done if he tries to just be partisan.
Did he seem to understand that?
Well, we said we'd talk, so let's hope. It's a little early. I just, it was a short conversation, but I look forward to sitting down with him and trying to work with him.
On AI specifically, former Speaker Kevin McCarthy, he was interested in this issue.
Yes.
Did you get any indication that this new speaker has any interest in doing something?
Do not, he's a bit of not a tabula rasa, but something I don't know that. I don't know him. I never met him before. And so I can't give you that answer, but it's something we'll explore.
Okay. As far as funding AI is concerned, another challenge with House Republicans is they are trying to dramatically decrease government funding. Do you think that in appropriations bills this year or an extra bill this year, there could be funding for AI?
Yes. There's a broad mainstream of Republicans, and a lot of them realize, who tells us we need to go forward on AI, among others? The military and the defense establishment and national security. So Senator Rounds, who's been great on this across the board, but what got his first interest, he's a national security expert, was that issue. So I don't think you could look at on AI, and hopefully not anything else. I hope not. That's been the problem. You can't look at the whole Republican caucus as these 30 Freedom Caucus people who just want to cut spending on everything. They're not a majority even of the Republican Party, even though sort of the tail wagged the cat. Or the two tails, or whatever it was. I don't know if it was a leg or a tail that was extra. But in any case, so I think there's going to be mainstream support for this, and particularly a lot of our more conservative Republicans are sort of similar to me in a certain sense. We've been China hawks.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't do anything, China's going to get ahead of us. Andresen was at our thing yesterday, our forum, and he said that. He said that's the one place he thinks we need government involvement because we can't let China get ahead of us.
So that goes back to a question I asked earlier, and that's exactly what I was thinking, if the United States is behind, because the Defense Department is usually leaps and bounds ahead as technologically.
Yes.
Is the Defense Department, is the U.S.
We're not, if you talk to our leading experts,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's the DOD or NSA or CIA or any of those places, we're ahead. Okay. But the gap is narrowing, and we cannot just relax.
I guess I want to go in 3 different directions, but let me ask you again about
just go in your computer and go in 3 different directions.
AI, can I have some help on which direction to go next? Is there anything that the EU or any other country has done specifically that the United States is looking at that can be replicated here?
We are looking at what the EU has done. We're looking separately, and I think they have been a little more successful at what Great Britain has done. And we're trying to learn from their, it's in a sense that some of them went first is good for us. We learn what seems to be successful and what their mistakes are. So we are trying to learn from them. But as I said, EU has now had to pull back because they went too fast. And most of the practical companies looking at this said they couldn't abide by these regulations. It would just shut down AI in many areas. And another area that's really important, that's difficult, we don't want just a few, tech, a few big companies dominated. We don't want that to happen with AI. And one way to deal with that is open source. And a lot of people are very positive on open source. But how, if you have open source, do you prevent the bad guys from using the same database that will be accessible to good people? I guess can't say guys, I don't know. How do you thread that needle? Now, there are some open source advocates, we had some of them at our forum yesterday, who say you can do that, but that's not so easy. Easier said than done.
We just have a few minutes left, and so I want to turn to some news of the day. You mentioned the supplemental, the $106 billion for Israel and Ukraine, Taiwan, some border security. Are you confident that that will be able to stay intact and move forward?
Well, the good thing is Leader McConnell and I are on the same page as the president. In the old days, you would have said, okay, that settles it. But of course, now with the centrifugal forces, particularly in the Republican Party, you're never exactly sure. And so I'm hopeful. It is my goal to keep it intact, and it is McConnell's goal. And at the moment, I think we're in decent shape, but it's a little too early to make any conclusive judgment.
Okay, and on the war in Israel and Gaza, between Israel and Gaza, there's increasing amount of violence in the West Bank as well. Should Israel stop settlement expansions in the West Bank at this point?
Yeah, well, I'm not going to get into the granularity of that. I mean, our United States policy, led by the president, which I support, and I believe Israel supports, says there are 3 goals right now. One is to eliminate the threat from Hamas. The second is to try to get the hostages released. When I went to Israel last week, I sat with the families. And we had a bipartisan group, Senator Romney and Senator Cassidy, as well as myself, Senator Rosen, Senator Ossoff. We all cried for an hour. I mean, it was just so horrible. So second is release the hostages. But third is to minimize civilian casualties. And that's a serious problem. I think the humanitarian aid for Gaza that the president has proposed should, some of the right wing is saying take that out of the bill. I think it should definitely stay in the bill. And we'll see where it goes after that. It's a little, down the road to talk about what else could happen. One thing I will say, what showed great potential and might deal with the issue you talked about, it's unclear yet, is the tripartite agreement between Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the United States. And some people speculate that either Hamas or Hamas importuned by Iran one way or the other did all this viciousness, this horribleness, to take that off the rails. We got to keep that on the rails. And that might have a potential as it goes forward for a broader solution as well.
Is it on the rails still? Is it?
Well, we had a bipartisan delegation led by Cardin and Graham go to Saudi Arabia, and they seem to feel that there is still a desire to keep it going.
And we just have a few seconds left, but there was a horrible shooting in Maine last night. Have you spoken to Senator King or Senator Collins yet about that?
Spoke to Senator King. He's on his way up there right now. It's just awful, and it's premature to talk about it. They haven't even. He's still at large as of an hour ago, and but it just breaks your heart. We see this all the time.
Great. Senator Schumer, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank
really
you.
Informative.
Okay.
And stay here. There will be more guests.
And the real me is getting off the stage. You can have the AI guy back.
enterprises and anyone using these models, they need to know how to use their own data, their own know-how, their own expertise, their own trade secrets to combine with these powerful algorithms to actually build experiences that are, new, refreshing, different, and powerful to provide a lot of value to their customers. Military implementations of AI are going to be incredibly important. We need to ensure that in this next phase that the U.S. is both economically dominant, but also has military leadership as well when it comes to artificial intelligence.
Hello. That was a long quote from you, Alex. My name is Arati Prabhakar. I am a tech reporter at the Washington Post based in San Francisco, and I'm joined by Alex Wang, who you just saw that great intro about. It's really cool to see so many people here. Thank you so much for coming. This event was really oversubscribed, and I think we both go to a lot of events. We're both in San Francisco usually, and it's cool to come here to the other side of the country and see just the level of interest. And like in SF, it's kind of everything everyone's been talking about. Maybe we're even a little bit sick about it, but it's cool to say, okay, it's not just us. It's not just the weird, hippie commune out in the West Coast that's talking about this stuff. So thank you all for coming. Alex, I think we can just kind of jump right into it, but I just want to make sure for people who maybe haven't heard of Scale or maybe have heard of you but don't really know what you do, can you just in a couple sentences explain your company? Like, how are you different from a company like OpenAI or Google or Microsoft that's also doing AI right now?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I started the company back in 2016. I was studying artificial intelligence at MIT and this was the year when DeepMind came out with AlphaGo, when Google released TensorFlow, and it became very clear that artificial intelligence, even at that time, was going to be one of the most important technologies, certainly of my lifetime. And I started Scale really to build the foundations and power the development of AI with the most critical piece, the data. Since then, since starting the company in 2016, over the past 7 years, we've been a part of every major advancement in artificial intelligence. We've worked with many of the large autonomous vehicle efforts, including General Motors, Toyota, and many of the large automakers. We've worked closely with the US government and the DoD on many of the initial AI programs. I'm sure we'll talk about that here in a bit. And then we've worked very closely with the entire emergence of generative AI and large language models. We've worked with OpenAI since 2019, innovated on many novel methods and use of data for artificial intelligence, and work at this point with the vast majority of the AI ecosystem, players like Meta, Microsoft, and many others.
So it's kind of like picks and shovels of like this AI gold rush. Like you're selling the tools to help these companies develop these chatbots and LLMs and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think our differentiated view is perhaps that this entire industry needs platforms and it needs infrastructure to enable to be successful. And so our view is the best way to enable that all to happen is to power it an infrastructure platform that everybody can use and the entire industry can benefit from.
I mean, you mentioned the government. Obviously, your quotes, your congressional testimony, talking a lot about military use, talking a lot about China, geopolitics. You have a $250 million deal with the Pentagon. I mean, that's a serious amount of money. I mean, why, coming from San Francisco, it's not something that we hear a lot. We don't talk that much about even government tech and especially military tech. A lot of people out there are still uncomfortable with that. Why did you choose to kind of position your company this way to, really aggressively sell to the Pentagon? What's behind that choice?
Yeah, so I grew up in Los Alamos, New Mexico. For those of you who watched Oppenheimer, it was literally filmed in many places from my childhood. And both my parents worked for the National Lab in Los Alamos, working on fusion physics and weapons technology. And so I grew up in this hotbed of these incredibly brilliant scientists who had made it their career and made the decision to dedicate their lives towards building very advanced technology to ensure that we maintain US leadership. As artificial intelligence became a more and more real technology over the past decade, it became pretty clear that this technology was one of the very few technologies that had the ability to impact the balance of power globally. And in particular, the sort of, China published their strategy, Made in China 2025, of which chips and AI are some of the key tenets. They talk specifically about how they believe a future world will be primarily dominated by chips and semiconductors, and they need to invest heavily into that technology to enable future technologies such as AI. And so, in particular, I went to China. In 2018, I visited China. One of our investors organized this trip to understand the Chinese tech ecosystem. And in one of the companies, a Chinese facial recognition company, you walk in the lobby and there's a giant screen that shows like a video feed of the lobby, and your face immediately gets recognized as you walk in. And real time, you see your face be recognized. It recognizes who you are, your major demographics, like all this like very dystopian tech demo. And this was back in 2018, and basically realized that other countries were going to be, particularly China, was going to be very, very dedicated in using artificial intelligence to power their country's ambitions, let's say. And this was, this is well reported. They use facial recognition technology very actively to suppress Uyghurs and for in building a global surveillance state. And it became pretty clear that, if you believe that AI is going to be one of these critical technologies, there had to be American companies who could help bridge the gap between Silicon Valley and DC, and could help bridge the gap between this incredible wellspring of technology and innovation that was happening in San Francisco, happening in Silicon Valley, and bring that technology to the US government to actually empower America to stay ahead, to stay in a leadership position.
Right. I mean, we just heard from Leader Schumer, and he was he said, we are ahead, or the US is ahead, but the gap is narrowing. That's sort of his characterization of it. You and I were just talking backstage about chips and kind of, how we're, a lot of time when we talk about AI, we think about software, we think about things that are, learning themselves. But at the end of the day, hardware is a huge part of this. And so, I mean, do you think that characterization of, ahead, but the gap is narrowing is accurate? And how do you think about this race, or this arms race, so to speak?
Yeah, what I would probably say is certainly the US is ahead. The technologies were invented and innovated and developed predominantly in the United States. London, the UK as well, has been a key innovation hub for the technology. And so we're ahead today. I think China has incredible ambitions to catch up from a technological perspective, and they've demonstrated in the past, in both software and other AI technologies, a clear ability to catch up, and in some cases even surpass US tech capabilities. If we look at the last generation of artificial intelligence, computer vision technology, so being able to understand images and videos for technologies like facial recognition or self-driving cars, China was behind. These technologies were created and developed in the United States. China recognized that, immediately created very large domestic industries to fuel this AI development in facial recognition, in autonomous vehicles, and so on. And now if you look at where is the cutting edge computer vision technology being built, is actually in China. They successfully caught up and got ahead. And so my fear is in this current wave is that in large language models, in cutting edge generative AI and AI technologies, the same might happen yet again. We saw, it was reported earlier this year that China has bought $5 billion worth of high-end GPUs, predominantly NVIDIA GPUs. That's an incredible investment. That's a very large and decisive investment by Chinese tech giants to catch up to American technology. And in the backdrop of everything that's happening now in AI is is the scaling laws. And this is, I think, it's sort of a little bit behind the scenes, but this is the underlying trend that's defining everything, which is, simply put, we're using just dramatically more compute, dramatically bigger models, and dramatically more data to build dramatically more powerful algorithms. So in the past 4 years, there's been a 1,000-fold increase in the amount of data used to power large-scale AI systems. So in 2019, the models were about 2 billion parameters in size, and now they're about 2 trillion parameters in size. Many companies are on the record for over the next 3 years, roughly 3 years, for another 100-fold scale up in computational capacity for these algorithms. So over the course of that 7-year span, it's a 100,000-fold increase in the amount of computational power applied to training these large generative models. And that, there's very few industries where you see over a 7-year period, a 100,000-fold increase in resources. And so this creates a lot of pressure in how countries think about this technology. And in particular, it creates a lot of pressure on the supply chain. So as you mentioned, this depends a lot on hardware. It depends a lot on high-end GPUs, particularly GPUs manufactured and produced by NVIDIA. And we saw recently increased sort of export controls on chips. I think this is going to be an increasingly hotbed issue for the US versus other countries. Today, 100% of high-end GPUs are manufactured in Taiwan at TSMC.
Right.
So there's a very clear geopolitical tension that only increases, it will increase literally 100-fold over the next 3 years, which is that today there's the choke point of the entire AI industry and all AI progress comes in these fabs in Taiwan at TSMC. And so if there's a lot of ways this plays out, there's many scenarios, but in one such scenario where China deems that they're falling dramatically far behind, it makes it far more likely that they'd choose to invade Taiwan and either all the fabs in Taiwan blow up and TSMC blows up and set back AI progress across the board, or they seize them and then use that production solely for their own purposes.
There's a lot of people in Silicon Valley, prominent AI leaders, powerful AI leaders who are, talking about AI algorithms beginning to outthink humans in years rather than decades. And I think, I've been very skeptical about this, but these are very smart people who have serious chops and have huge amounts of followings within the industry. And some of them say, the worst thing you could do is attach something like that to a military system. And so, how do you engage with that, or how do you think about that belief that AI will, outstrip human ability to control it imminently? Like, do you take that seriously at all, or what do you think of that?
I think if you look at the existing technology that we have, as well as the technology that's coming down the pipe, and sort of like all of the research and understanding of where this technology is going, I don't think that's a reasonable fear as of now. I do think that this technology is incredibly powerful, both for use of ensuring that democratic powers stay on top and that the United States maintains a leadership position, and there's real misuse cases, and there's things that we need to be concerned about the technology being used for. Our view is that AI, if you look at the history of warfare, it's punctuated by technological advancements that create asymmetric advantage. Right. That's sort of the summarize centuries and centuries of warfare. And artificial intelligence is one of a small handful of technologies. It's not the only technology, but it's one of a small handful of technologies that has the potential to shift that balance of power going forward. We talked about this almost exactly 1 year ago with Eric Schmidt, and I think that the CCP is very clear about their ambitions. They're very clear that they believe, there's some writings that they have where they talk about AI as a potential leapfrog technology for the PLA versus the US DoD. They believe that if they overinvest into AI and the United States in parallel underinvest into artificial intelligence because we're going to overinvest into maintaining our existing systems, they could actually develop far superior capabilities than us in the United States. So broadly speaking, if you zoom all the way out, I think this is one of the key technologies for military power and hard power over the coming years, and we need to be thinking about it as such.
Do you draw any like red lines for yourself though? Because obviously you're providing infrastructure for the government. You're providing tools for the government to crunch their data, to get smarter, to get faster. But if there was a bid for say a couple of years, your own tech is advanced and there's a bid for some kind of maybe cyber weapon that would go and disrupt an enemy nation's energy infrastructure at a time of war, and you had the capacity to build something like that, would you bid for an offensive weapon like that?
Yeah, so our view, the DoD has actually spent a lot of time thinking about these questions, and I think the ethics of the use of artificial intelligence has been one of the primary pillars of their exploration and their effort. The DoD published their ethical AI principles a number of years ago, long before the technology was even as powerful as today, let alone even more powerful, to do a lot of, I think, preemptive thinking about what happens as this technology becomes more and more powerful. And I think they're very thoughtful, and I think in general our view is that we should build technologies that adhere ultimately to the DoD's ethical AI principles. Right. There's yet an additional piece, which is the let's say, how do you enforce that we actually adhere to these principles, right? And our view is that there has to be a lot of advancements in testing and evaluation of AI systems. I think the greatest fear of many military commanders I've spoken to is that there will be some decision that's made, rightly or wrongly, to deploy a very immature AI system that could then create dramatic risks of our soldiers on the battlefield. And so I think we need to be thinking about what does it mean to actually have mature AI technology versus hype-driven AI technology, and how do we ensure that any technology that we deploy goes through the proper rigorous testing and evaluation of red teaming and deep sort of principles-based assessment to ensure that we have actually effective systems.
Right. And I mean, do you think we're there? Because there's also some autonomous weapon systems that are already out there, that other countries are using. There's, drones that are able to kind of detect certain targets and make decisions sort of on their own based on their own programming without a human necessarily in the loop. And so in some ways it feels like this stuff is already getting out of our hands.
Our view, and in our conversations with most of the leaders in the DoD, is that humans are always quite necessarily in the loop. The technology as it stands today is primarily useful as a decision aid, not a decision maker. And there's a lot of very advanced military analysis on this matter. I think if you were to sum it up overall, it's that today, one of the key problems impacting our military is that there's too much information but too little intelligence. Right. There's an inundation of information coming from all sorts of different sensors and platforms, and the ability to synthesize that into core intelligence that can help military leaders and commanders understand what they should do. That's the missing gap. That's very different from, I think, fully autonomous weaponry or fully autonomous operations. I think it's more about decision aid and helping human decision makers and human operators be able to operate more effectively.
A lot of your business model is, requires contract workers to kind of assess technology, label things. This is something that obviously not just you, but the entire AI industry, there's a lot of humans that are behind it. And some colleagues of mine earlier this summer reported, went and spoke to some contractors of yours in the Philippines who, weren't getting all the money that they believe that they were entitled to. And you don't need to talk specifically about your situation, but if you look at the industry as a whole, there's still a lot of human involvement, right? And where, in terms of that contract workforce, is that something that you think for years and years and years, as AI continues to get smarter, we will need hundreds of thousands of humans to be involved in that painstaking work? Or is that something that is only really at the beginning of the tech development, and then down the road it might not be necessary anymore?
Our view is that humans will always be very, very critical towards the development of AI technology. And so there will always be humans in the loop. There will always be humans involved in the actual development of the algorithms that are used. Back in 2019, we actually worked very closely with OpenAI to innovate and develop some of the today very cutting-edge techniques to enable humans to provide input and preferences into the models to be able to guide their behavior. We developed this technique called reinforcement learning with human feedback, RLHF, that has now become a cornerstone of the entire AI industry in ensuring that we build very helpful and harmless AI models. There have been, OpenAI has published some of their research on this. They've reported that through use of reinforcement learning with human feedback, they're able to achieve an improvement in the helpfulness of the models equivalent to 100-fold increase in model size. Simply put, what that means is, there's almost a quantum leap forward in the ability to build AI systems that actually adhere to human intent, adhere to human principles because of this technology that we've developed with them.
We've just got a minute left, and I want to ask you the same question that we asked Senator Schumer, which is, you've testified a lot, you've talked a lot about, concerns, risks. You've mentioned even in this conversation about, guardrails and testing and evaluation. I mean, but if you just zoom out and think about AI in general and how quickly this technology is moving, what keeps you up at night?
I think global proliferation of the technology is the most concerning trend today. If you look at what's happened just in the past year since ChatGPT, you've seen it become a primarily domestic technology to being an incredibly international technology. Some of the most advanced open source models were developed in Paris and France. There's been very large open source models being developed in UAE and in the Middle East. And then China, as I mentioned, has bought $5 billion worth of high-end chips to put their own hat into the ring of AI development. And the technology is at risk of real misuse. Some of the risks that keep me up at night the most are misuse in cyber attacks and misuse in bioweaponry. And these are some of the use cases of the technology that I think could really negatively impact humanity and could have very, very negative consequences for us all.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us, Alex.
Thanks, Garrett.
Don't go anywhere. We'll have another guest very soon. But yeah, go ahead.
The advent of AI shows that multilateral cooperation is more important than ever. It's a challenge that will require us to break out of our own echo chambers and consider the broad interest of humanity.
Good morning, I'm Heather Long, a columnist and editorial board member at The Post, and I'm thrilled to be joined this morning with Geeta Gopinath, the first deputy managing director of the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, and a renowned economist who just got back from Morocco, I believe. So, okay, we've talked about the politics of AI, we've talked about the defense capabilities of AI, let's talk about the economics of AI. And the number one question that we get at The Post is how many jobs are going to be lost from AI? What's the best estimate from the IMF?
It's a pleasure to join you, Heather. And indeed, that is a top question that we are studying. So I think the way you want to think about it is what fraction of the labor force is exposed to the new technology, and especially generative AI. And it varies by country. So if you take the case of the US or the UK, we're talking about an exposure of 60 to 70% of the labor force that's exposed to AI. But that's not enough to know, because the technology could be great in the sense that it could complement the workforce, which is raise the productivity of the worker. But alternatively, it could be a substitute for the worker. So that's the important question is, so not just the level of exposure, but whether it complements human labor or it substitutes for human labor. And that's where we've been looking at this more carefully to see how much of a substitution might you see. So if you take the case of the US, we have an estimate that about 60% of the workforce is exposed to AI, but only about half of that gets a complementary effect. So we're talking about 30% then of the labor force for whom this technology can be productivity enhancing and can complement labor as we're substituting it. Similarly in the UK. But then if you look at, for instance, a country like India, where a large portion of the workforce is in, say, agriculture, their exposure to AI is only around 30%. If you look at Brazil and South Africa, we're looking at numbers like 40%. So again, the question is that this is clearly a general purpose technology, which is why it's having such a wide effect, and we're discussing this here. But the question is what's going to be the impact on productivity, and that varies by country.
And it also varies, I think, by gender. If I read some of your research from the IMF, can you tell us why women may be more impacted?
Yeah, so if you look at, again, in terms of exposure, women tend to be in areas like in the retail sector and mostly services sector where there is greater exposure to AI. But again, it's kind of, if it's an even bag in terms of whether it's helping raise productivity of women or substituting for it. So that's a mixed bag, but they certainly have higher exposure. Now, in countries where they are agriculture-driven economies, where women are also employed, they don't get affected as such. So let me give you, for instance, an example of this difference between exposure versus complementarity and substitutability. Radiologists, for instance, we know are one occupation which is very exposed to AI. I mean, the whole image recognition, the ability to detect anomalies in images, something very powerful that can be done. But at the same time, it's unlikely that society is going to say, well, we're going to let a machine entirely determine and do the diagnosis, like completely replace a human being with a machine. It's much more dangerous to do that. So this is an area where there is a lot of complementarity, and you could be effectively raising the productivity of radiologists. But on the other hand, if you look at, say, clerical workers who are very exposed to AI, in that particular case, the cost of errors are somewhat smaller. And therefore, those are the kinds of jobs that will get replaced.
You also mentioned productivity. I mean, if anybody takes their economics class, their first one in college, you basically learn that things can get better, growth can happen if you either work more hours or if you work smarter, if you work more productively. It sounds like you keep using this word complementary for AI. How much of a boost could this potentially be? Is this comparable to an industrial revolution? How do we think through how this could boost global well-being?
Yep. I mean, economies are kind of looking for the holy grail of where the next boost in productivity will come from. And AI certainly offers great promise. So the question is, what kind of an effect will it have? We have what we call firm-level studies done, using firm-specific data, which shows that the effect can be, based on current studies, can be quite substantial. On average, it can raise labor productivity growth by 2 to 3 percentage points. Now, just to put that in context, over the last 15 years, on average, labor productivity growth in the US has been a little over 1%. So if you're going to add 2 to 3 percentage points, that would be very large. And some of these numbers, in fact, studies get numbers close to 7 percentage points, which are large. But I think we should be very careful because to extrapolate from these numbers to what we might see for the economy as a whole, because one, this is on very specific firms. It's not clear whether it's going to apply to other sectors. And secondly, one of the things that we've always struggled with when it comes to general purpose technology is to envision what the economy will look like. There are going to be occupations and sectors that we cannot imagine at this point that may come around. And therefore, it's just inherently very difficult. The last time we had a boom in labor productivity was in the second half of the 1990s, thanks to the IT boom. And that was when productivity growth was around 2.5%. After that, it's been around 1% on average. So again, the prospects are there, but it's an inherently complex estimate to make. The estimates that are coming out seem very promising.
Yeah, but I wonder as well, you were speaking about the differences between the impact on the United States and the UK and other advanced economies versus what we traditionally call developing world. Does this just exacerbate inequality? Are you concerned it just creates this really big divide between winners and losers?
It is going to affect different segments of the labor force in different ways within countries and, of course, across countries. So let me start with, if I look across countries, developing countries have relied to an important extent in terms of their growth, in terms of their exports, on their labor abundance, on the relative labor abundance, right? And since it's clear that this new technology will displace the need for some kinds of labor for sure, that puts developing countries at a disadvantage. Secondly, to be able to use this technology, you need vast amounts of data. The infrastructure is needed for that. These are expensive investments. And again, developing countries are in a disadvantage at this point relative to advanced economies, so that could generate greater disparity. Now, within countries, again, it's different depending upon whether you have a college degree and you're able to then therefore enhance your productivity because of this new technology versus if you're going to get replaced by it. One interesting difference relative to what we saw during the last revolution, kind of automation-driven effects, is that we might see some leveling off also. We might see some less polarization, especially at the lower to mid-end. Because what we're seeing is that the experience that comes with working multiple years, that what you gain from that and the premium that's on it might actually shrink because that knowledge that comes with experience can be much easily transferred to newer entrants into the labor force. And that is something that we are seeing in some experiments in the data.
Yeah, that would be a huge shift for sure for many of us and how we think about our careers and our lives. So the last panel was talking us through some of the risks to a potential global war or other tragedy that could come if AI is misused. We obviously think a lot about financial stability, what could happen to the global economy. I was struck, Gary Gensler, the head of the American Securities and Exchange Commission, obviously he has to spend his day thinking about risks to the economy, and he recently said that he thought it was almost certain in the next 10 years AI could cause a financial crisis. That really surprised me. Do you agree with that? What would drive a financial crisis?
I mean, again, the promises from AI are great, and you see the financial services industry grabbing onto it, but the risks are immense, and the risks range all the way from ethical issues to existential issues. So it's a huge spectrum, and you've been covering this with your previous speakers. So yes, as the IMF, we focus more on issues of economic stability and financial stability. So let's look at, for instance, on financial stability. I can go into many different areas, but one of the things you always worry about when it comes to financial stabilities and what creates systemic risks is a herd mentality, a herding behavior, kind of sentiment-driven investment. And in this environment where you have very few models that everybody relies on for making predictions, for making decisions, for instance, on what to invest in and where to invest, we worry that could just put herd mentality on steroids. And that is an important risk that we have to pay attention to. The second thing is this technology, remarkable as it is, it's also hard to explain how the outcomes are coming about because it's incredibly complicated. And so exposed to, when things go wrong and you have to give your explanation to your shareholders about why exactly did you make these decisions, the lack of transparency, the lack of being able to tell what's driving these decisions is going to be very difficult. So that's one whole set of issues. Then, of course, there is the other set of issues which come with data privacy. The data has to be, in most cases, confidential. There is a real risk that with this kind of technology that you could be putting out unknowingly, unintentionally confidential data in the public domain, and that is incredibly risky. We worry about what happens if you have AI bots that are basically determining underwriting standards or figuring out who gets a loan. because we know that embedded bias is a big problem with this technology. So there are multiple aspects that we're paying close attention to.
You know, another theme that we keep hearing over and over again today is the need for global rules around AI because of these challenges and risks, whether military, financial, or data privacy that you've just spoken about. But that's really hard to get all these nations to agree on anything. We've seen many trade issues in just the last few years. What gives you hope that we could potentially have some sort of global rules of the world for AI?
I am hopeful because I think everybody across the world recognizes that there are some very big risks associated with this technology. And I have the opportunity to sit at G7 and G20 meetings, and I haven't heard disagreement on this. I think there is common agreement that this requires world attention. There's also common understanding that no country is alone in this and can handle it all, because this is a truly globally cross-cutting issue. So in that sense, there is a similarity to climate. And to the extent that we have we have the Paris Agreement, for instance, which, it does have its limitations, but that is a global agreement that came about, kind of have a common framework to think about how to deal with climate change. You could see a parallel for work on AI and generative AI. Similarly, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is this fantastic expert group that gives you knowledge about how to deal with climate change. Something similar on AI would be very helpful.
Well, I hope you're right, although we know there's been struggles on the climate agreement. So we've been asking every panelist so far, what keeps you up at night on AI? You've already outlined a number of challenges, but what's that top issue that you worry about?
Well, I think firstly, things are moving so quickly, and I sit in and listen to enough technologists who spook you completely, telling you that this can all change dramatically in a year or in 2 years. So it's just the speed with which the technology is progressing relative to the speed with which policymakers are able to keep up with it. And like I said, the multiple dimensions of how this could impact societies is immense. For instance, I do worry that as phenomenal as this technology is, it's heavily driven in the private sector by private money. If you go back and you look at, for instance, 2014, 2015, where did most of the machine learning models come from? They came from academia, they came from universities. And now, if you look at where the newest models are coming from, they're entirely from the private sector. And there's a huge gap, right? I mean, there's a huge difference. So I think it would be a mistake not to ensure that there is enough public funding, for instance, for universities, to make sure that they are able to also be at the frontier producing this knowledge, because that's how we as a society will also figure out what's best and what's not as good.
Well, let's end on a little bit of an optimistic note. If you follow economics, the United States GDP number came out this morning. It was a blockbuster number, growth in the third quarter in the United States of 4.9%. We were supposed to be in a recession now. Instead, we've accelerated growth. How did this happen? How did we end up in such a good place?
Yeah, no, it is. Just to concur, it is a blockbuster number. If you look at how often a number like that shows up, it's around 10% of the time in terms of, if you look at the distribution of growth rates. So this is a very, very, strong growth number. It has come in substantially above what we were expecting for this quarter. In terms of why, again, we were expecting it to be a lower number, so we're going to have to go back and rethink this. But what is true is the US labor market is very strong. Yes, we have seen some softening, but it is still an incredibly strong labor market, and that plays a very important role in consumer decisions and spending. We still have the residual effects of what came with the support that was provided to households and firms, and including the desire to kind of rebound from the pandemic. That effect is still there. And fiscal policy in the US is obviously highly procyclical, or it's very loose, depending upon looking at where these indicators are. It is a question of how much that is contributing to these growth numbers. I think our assessments are that could be relatively small, but still, we have a fiscal policy that is really, in terms of a deficit of 8%, is quite large given where the economy is.
And lastly, can this keep going? Can the U.S. manage this soft landing to avoid a recession? Like you all, for instance, have forecast slower growth for the United States and much of the world next year. But obviously this year has defied expectations, at least in this country.
Yeah. The resilience of the U.S. is remarkable. And it kind of actually also stands out relative to what we're seeing in other parts of the world. So there was a time when there was a little bit more commonality. But the U.S. growth is much stronger, for instance, than what we're seeing in Europe, where, on the other hand, indicators are more tipping towards contraction territory. There is a big difference here. Our baseline is, for a soft landing in the U.S., and this additional data point certainly makes the case stronger. But that said, again, looking ahead, I think the one thing we have to notice is the fact that long-term rates, long-end interest rates are going up, and they've gone up quite substantially over the last few weeks, and that we expect will feed into spending behavior.
So it probably can't keep going like this. Probably not more 4.9% if we meet again in January.
I would be very surprised, yes.
All right. Geeta Gopinath, thank you for your comments and insights today.
Thank you.
Stay tuned, our next guest is running out. Thank you.
Where do AI breakthroughs get their start?
At Intel, it's a passion to reimagine what's possible
and a platform to build what's next.
Empowering those with disabilities starts with assistive AI.
The intelligent factory starts with edge analytics.
The next generation of AI experts starts with education. And that's just the start.
The solutions are countless.
The impacts are endless.
But the foundation is always the same.
It starts with Intel.
Hi, I'm Jean Meserve, a security analyst for Canada's CTV News and also host of the NatSec Tech podcast. Thrilled to have with me here today Dr. Melvin Greer. Dr. Greer is chief data scientist at Intel, where he is using artificial intelligence and other technologies to accelerate the transformation of data into a strategic asset for global organizations. Dr. Greer is also a senior advisor to the FBI's Information Technology and Data Division. Intel describes AI as one of its superpowers. We're going to delve into what that means and also talk more broadly about the technology, its potential benefits, and how we manage the risks, some of which have been talked about this morning. We're also going to talk about where AI might be heading. Dr. Greer, thanks so much for being with us.
I am so happy to be here. Thanks.
Great. So from your perspective, what potential benefits do you see AI having for society?
You know, Jean, Intel is moving the idea of AI everywhere as a concept forward. As we've heard, there's almost every industry out there that's adopting or working to adopt AI, and the folks that are adopting it are actually having some really great successes. They're improving people's lives in a very substantial way. And while, there's the new shiny object of generative AI that we've been hearing a lot about, generative AI is just a very sliver of all the AI that we can talk about. We are actually seeing just the very smallest of potential about where AI and what it can do and where it will do. And so from an Intel perspective, AI everywhere is really about ensuring that AI capabilities are available to anyone through any device, anywhere. And we're really excited about being able to be an enabler for this AI everywhere idea.
What specific industries do you see benefiting from the use of AI?
Well, there are a whole host of them, but I'll just mention three. The first one is healthcare. Healthcare is great. We're seeing advances in immunotherapy, personalized medicine, better remediation of disease and research in ways we haven't seen before. I'm also excited about the work we're seeing in public sector around transportation and smart cities. I'd say that we're seeing some really great work in finance. So personalized financial tools, fraud, waste, and abuse analysis, things like that. And then environmental analysis, environmental factors associated with weather and climate. So these are really great areas where things are making material impact with AI.
So let's talk about the flip side, the risks. Disinformation.
Disinformation is a serious problem. And it is one of the things that we speak a lot about and we talk about. But AI is, in spite of all the technical capabilities we talk about, actually a very human-centric activity. And as a human-centric activity, we have the ability to shape AI for good as we elevate an awareness of the risks associated with AI. And so with that in mind, Intel is very focused on this idea. We've been working very tirelessly on security and trust as it relates to AI. We just released a new product called an AI Trust Authority, which helps with not only security and privacy, but also third-party attestation. These are the key elements that we feel are going to be required in order to eliminate and deal with some of these risks.
There also has been a lot of concern about the embedding of bias and prejudice in these systems. Are you addressing that?
Well, I'm very concerned about it. I think one of the ways that we're actually really focused on it is we're increasing the amount of diversity and the number and types of people that are participating in the development of these AI solutions. We can have a long conversation of diversity, and I can add more color to that. But what it comes down to is we need people who are thinking different than we are, people who are anthropologists, ethicists, sociologists, community leaders, to be involved in the development and deployment of these technologies. Otherwise, we do run the risk of having to deal with more bias.
Also concerned about the violation of intellectual property rights.
Yeah, there's a lot of talk about that. I think one of the things we're interested in doing is advancing this idea of trust and security. And the way that we do that is through those products that I talked about.
And what about cybercrime and whether AI facilitates that?
Yeah, so I think this is a serious concern, right? We're very interested in ensuring that we provide the guidance and the mechanisms to support an understanding of how people are using it. Intel has a AI ethics program, a Bill of Rights, if you will, that ensures that we have people who are consuming our capabilities, our technologies, that adhere to some basic principles associated with how they're going to be used.
You talked a little bit about what this AI everywhere meant. Talk to us about why that's important.
AI everywhere is important because it is so pervasive in the society that we live in. Our ability to deal with all of these great transformations is important. When we think about the way that public sector is using it to support citizen services, being able to get access to those services, aggregate those services and make it easy for people to be able to use them. AI everywhere is impactful because it's very, very broadly being developed and used across a wide spectrum of industries.
How do you make sure it happens?
Well, we continue to ask, participate. We get people to communicate with us. We want to involve more people in this activity. One of the things that we're doing is we're spending a lot of time in educational resources, because there is a talent shortage with respect to AI. And one of the things we're really focused on in doing there is working with not only some of the R1 institutions. Intel's known for working with great large-scale institutions, but we have a community college program where we're working with 18 community colleges. More than 50% of these community colleges are in environments or in areas that are working or supporting underserved populations. And so, our ability to ensure that those skills get to more people in a much wider view is what is going to be required in order to ensure that people take a look at how this technology is being used ethically.
Do you think there's some key to getting more minority participation in AI?
Yeah, targets. We want to target, and this is one of the reasons why we're focused.
What do you mean by that?
Well, we opened a new office in Atlanta. We have a new office in Atlanta because we understand that that is one of the places in the U.S. where we have some minority representation. Representation in general is really important. If you take a look at the new fabrications that we're building in Ohio, it's really important for us not only to work with great universities like Ohio State, but we're working with a whole series of universities that are outside of the R1 institutions, so R2 institutions, historical black colleges and universities, other community colleges. And what this does, which is really, really important, is gets more people in the conversation around AI, gets more people involved in the evaluation and the potential harm and the benefits. And it really means that we are able to deploy AI everywhere in a very reasonable and responsible way.
Is it just about reaching people in community college and universities, or do you have to start younger? Is K through 12 really important here?
Well, I'll tell you, as a black data scientist and a fellow at Intel, representation is a big deal for me. And I spend a significant amount of time in K through 12 working with students on robotics, data science, and leadership skills, because I want them to understand that there's an opportunity for them as well. We have the ability to harness the creativity and the innovation that comes from not only the diversity in between race, but also in gender. We are focused very heavily on neurodivergent capabilities that our employees and our customers represent to us. And so it's this kind of diversity that really is important.
So do a little dream-o-vision for me. Look into your crystal ball and tell me, what does the future hold, particularly for generative AI that has been so much topic of conversation today?
Generative AI is going to continue to grow, and it's going to be impactful. But in a much broader sense, AI is going to take on a real significant impact in the way we work, live, and play. As we move from Web 2 technologies, where we are focused more on consumption of technical capabilities, and move to Web 3 technologies, where we are advancing the creator part of technologies and supporting the creator, we will find that these new AI capabilities are going to be accelerants. They will be the catalyst for helping to move through that space.
So what specifically do you think generative AI will be doing in 5 years?
Well, there's a couple of things. I think first we have to think about the development community and the developer community. Generative AI is helping to harness the power of the developer community, and Intel is absolutely focused on energizing that community in a way that we haven't seen before. The reason people are really enamored with working with Intel on AI is not just because we do great silicon hardware, but because we're bringing hardware and software together. And so from a generative AI perspective, we're seeing this in our Intel developer community cloud. What we're seeing is that they are looking at open source software, open source hardware. They're igniting that combination, and what they're doing is they're creating whole new applications of this technology that we haven't seen before. What we are excited about is that when we help developers in this environment, because of the use of Intel's hardware acceleration, and we teach them how to optimize software on our hardware, they're seeing a 4 to 10x improvement in performance. And what that means is faster applications development, faster application deployment from ideation to production.
Are there any significant technological hurdles that need to become overcome in the near future?
Yeah, and I think it's reasonable to conclude that people have identified environmental factors as one of those technological hurdles, as an example.
We're talking about the energy consumption issue?
Yes, that's right, that's right. And so, from our perspective, it's an important thing to be considering. We're working very hard in Intel Labs on our next generation brain-inspired research. It's neuromorphic computing. And neuromorphic computing has three capabilities which particularly address this environmental factor. The first is it is focused on very high speed in the very same way as the human brain operates. But also it operates in extremely low power consumption, much lower power than we do in today's environments, and then much smaller data sets. And so with that in mind, we think that this is going to be a precursor to the kinds of solutions that are going to be required to overcome this environmental hurdle.
So you're confident that the hurdles can in fact be overcome then?
I'm confident that by talking about it, getting more people engaged, and getting some of the best minds that are kind of represented on this Washington Post Live activity, we're going to be able to solve some of that, yes.
So bottom line, we've talked about the benefits, we've talked about some of the risks. Are you terrified or are you excited?
I am so excited. Listen, the reason I'm excited is because, my mom died of a terminal illness when I was younger, and she didn't have the benefit of personalized medicine or of immunotherapy. She wasn't able to take advantage of the large data sets that are driving healthcare, drug interdiction, and targeting of great therapies. But today, we're seeing that. And it is not something that I'm taking lightly. I'm actually in data science because of this thing that happened in my family. And I'll tell you that when I see all of the great things that we're using AI for, I'm absolutely excited.
And in terms of the international competition, that's come up a couple of times today. Are you confident that the U.S. is in the lead and can maintain that lead? I'm not
really going to speak to the geopolitics of the AI capability, although I will absolutely admit that geopolitics is an extremely important part of what we're doing. But if you take a look at the actions that Intel has taken over the past 2 years, we are growing our fabrication capabilities in Arizona, in Ohio, and around the world. We are absolutely focused on participating in the conversations around how the federal government is going to be able to take advantage of artificial intelligence and data science. We helped to participate in the discussions around the CHIPS and Science Act in a meaningful way. And it's because we are absolutely sensitive to and want the U.S. to continue to move forward as a catalyst for AI adoption.
Dr. Melvin Greer, Chief Data Scientist for Intel, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks.
And now we'll hand it back to the Washington Post.
autocomplete in your emails. This is what has been powering content moderation on social networks, but it hasn't really been deployed as a consumer tool. We haven't been able to play around with the technology to see how far AI has come.
Hello again for those just joining us. I am tech columnist Jeff Fowler. I do not have any more deepfake senators or three-legged cats for you. However, I have something that I think is even better. Two of the smartest people I know about artificial intelligence. On this side, we've got a tech culture reporter, Natasha Tiku, and then news analysis writer Will Aramis. They have been leading our coverage of artificial intelligence here at the Post, and hopefully they can say the things out loud that maybe other people don't want to say about what's really going on. So let's get started. Will, I've got a question for you. You are exploring and using all of this technology, trying to figure it out. What advances and capabilities of AI that you've seen in the last year have shocked you, surprised you, alarmed you?
So I've been shocked, surprised, and alarmed by just about everything that's come out since Midjourney and DALL-E,
Okay, so everything.
including ChatGPT. I know that Natasha was not as shocked because she had been following more closely all the developments behind the scenes that led up to the sort of consumer launch of these generative AI products. I think what's shocking about them is how human-like they seem. They do things that we previously thought only humans could do and machines couldn't do. They can hold a conversation with us on just about any topic. They
talk like Senator Schumer.
Talk like Senator Schumer. They can draw a picture of anything, a photorealistic image of just about anything. And I think that's also the danger. I mean, in some ways, they're a realization of this idea that Alan Turing proposed 75 years ago of a machine that can fool us into thinking it's human, right? It's almost indistinguishable from a human, at least in certain contexts. And that's amazing, but it's also dangerous. It's also, I think, the problem, or at least part of the problem, is the capacity for deception. I mean, these generative AI tools, because they can pass themselves off as human, raise all kinds of novel problems. One of the recent ones that we wrote about at the Post was voice fakes, which you have demonstrated so helpfully earlier today. But they're being used in the real world. So in the Slovakian elections that happened a few weeks ago, there was an audio clip that went around virally on social media by Slovakian standards that seemed to show the Progressive Party leader discussing a scheme to buy votes from the country's marginalized Roma population. And it sounded like him. It sounded like a prominent journalist that he was talking to. It seems to have fooled lots of people. Whether it influenced the election, who knows? But we're going to see more and more of that because this technology is so good at mimicking humans.
Mm-hmm. So, Natasha, we've been talking about how great a lot of this technology is. But also, so I've been reviewing technology for a long time. And one thing that shocked me about some of what I've tried with, especially with generative AI this year, is how often bad it is. I mean, we ask it to draw a cat and it gets 3 legs. I was testing a chatbot for teenagers that gave me advice about how to hide pot from my parents. Used to be that when giant Silicon Valley companies put out products, they made sure they were perfect before they came out. Now we seem to be just fine with putting out stuff that has all sorts of problems. Why is that, Natasha? Like, why did they lose their shame about the quality of their products?
Well, I think that's something we've only seen in the past year. If you look at, this technology has been around for a while. If you go all the way back to 2016, when Microsoft launched its chatbot, Tay.
That's right.
This was really influential in the way that a lot of tech companies thought about what was acceptable, because within 16 hours or so, they had to take it down because it was put up on Twitter and it was spewing hate speech and offensive speech. Trolls got to it, and it was really, like you said, kind of shame its bad publicity. But what really changed in the past year is not necessarily OpenAI's technology. Actually, Anthropic also was just about to put out a chatbot, but it's its strategy towards release, and this argument that they've championed, that you need to put this technology out into the real world in order to really understand its harms. And that has opened the floodgates for Google, Microsoft, Meta, everyone else, not just lowering the bar to launching, but also keeping the products up when things are going wrong.
So it's an arms race?
It's a race. It's a race. Let's say it's a race.
I'll call it an arms race.
So that means, it means that, the thing that's stopping risky products from coming out to the public is, a company's appetite for bad publicity and their competitive streak. So I think that's somewhat alarming.
So, Will, we know these products have problems, and yet companies are still buying them and using them and building our world around us with them. Why is that? What is the implication of that?
Yeah, I mean, you'll hear AI enthusiasts who are convinced that AI can do just about anything that a human can do, sometimes better. And then you'll hear skeptics who say, well, they've heard about all the flaws and the limitations of these systems, and they say, well, these will never be of use. Why is there all this hype? It's just a parlor trick. But I think the reality is that it actually doesn't have to be as good as a human at a task in order for some company to try replacing a human with it. I mean, it can just be, doesn't have to be as better, doesn't have to be as good, it can be cheaper and faster, right? I mean, I think the logic of disruption is relevant. Clayton Christensen's idea of disruption was not that startups come along and do something better than the incumbents, it's that they come along and do something that's worse, but it's lightweight and it's cheaper, and I think that's what we're seeing with AI. So you see articles being written by AI online. Companies
not in the Washington Post.
Not in the Washington Post. Well, that's a good point, because if your business is an incumbent and you have a brand to protect, most incumbents I think are being pretty cautious with how they use generative AI in particular, because they know it can go wrong and it can blow up in their face, and that will damage the value of their brand, which is the value of the company. But if you're a startup, you're not worried about protecting the value of your brand. You're worried about, can I do something in a new way? Can I find some margin or scale here that the incumbents can't do? And so you see now there are content companies. I interviewed one for a story I did that's using AI to write horoscopes, to do interpretations of dreams, and we're even seeing some that are using AI to write news stories, sometimes bogus news stories, but they get clicks, they make money, and it's so cheap. It doesn't have to be good as long as you can get enough clicks to get the ad revenue or the affiliate link revenue or whatever it is.
And how does that impact our economy then, when the web is being filled with cheap, possibly inaccurate stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the big questions is, how does it affect the information economy, right? Yeah. I mean, it's we've had this system for 20 years where you go to Google and you look something up and it sends you to other websites, and you can see the source of the information and you know who wrote it. Increasingly, people are going to be asking questions of AI, whether that's on Google or Bing or ChatGPT, and getting a response from AI, and maybe cutting out the middleman of the people who actually, the professionals who actually create the content.
Still worth clicking on those Washington Post stories, folks, just to put in a little plug. Okay, Natasha, so AI has to be trained. It has to learn. It's not a human, but it has to learn from somewhere. Where does the data come from that is feeding all of these, and what are the implications of that?
There is actually very little understanding about how these machines function, right? How large language models in particular. But one thing we do know is that the breakthroughs that we've seen are a function of feeding them massive amounts of data scraped from the web. And I recently wrote about a new project called the Data Provenance Initiative. And it took a look at 1,800 of these fine-tuning models. That's the models that are used at the end, data sets that are used at the end, so they're a little bit smaller, and they found most of them are from North America and Western Europe. And we have seen some of the research coming out already that says that not only are the biases in that data then reflected in the outputs, but when it comes to text-to-image AI, like Midjourney, Stable Diffusion, DALL-E, stereotypes are amplified. So that means, especially if it's being pushed as the technology of the future, the platform of the future, that we are encoding biases, possibly from outdated links on the internet. These scrapes, the web scrapes that they use are really indiscriminate. And projects like the Data Provenance Initiative are starting to give us some light into the black box. But I think, if you try out these tools, you can see the gender stereotypes, the racial stereotypes. I mean, it's as simple as these very popular headshot generators. They tend to sexualize Asian women and Black women in order to professionalize your image. They lighten your skin.
I tried one with myself, and because I'm a white male with certain color hair, it turned me into wizards and Steve Jobs, and I was not sexualized.
Yes, that's the bias that we're worried about.
Yeah, no, there is definitely bigger problems. I just point that out to say this is what it thought of me. So, okay, so bias is one of the problems with these data sets, but then we have other questions. So do these companies have copyright to these things? Do they have rights to use them? Or are they taking them from us without our knowledge? What is the impact on our privacy? Will or Natasha, whoever wants to tackle that giant wormhole.
Okay, well, I'm not a lawyer, so don't take any of this as legal advice. But I think there is a perception that these questions are still up in the air. And in terms of our knowledge, that has certainly not been the case. We've seen lawsuits from book authors, from software coders, and from individuals who say that their work was taken without consent, compensation, or credit. Oftentimes it's not even a money issue. They just want some attribution there. So I think that, the big companies, they have been talking to, I've written recently about some of the negotiations they've been having with newspaper companies, with some of the websites that they have used to be a big part of their training data. And I think they're trying to lock something down before they have to wait for the outcome of lawsuits and legislation.
Mm-hmm.
I love that you focus on the data so much, because I think people underestimate, literally the output of an AI system is a function of the data that went into it. And the data that went into it is so often, of murky or unknown provenance and quality. One of the solutions, and you had asked earlier about why are companies using some of these AI technologies despite their flaws. I think one of the approaches that some more careful companies are looking at is, can we train these systems on our own data? And can we have the sort of the conversational interface and the sort of general language ability of a ChatGPT, but can we make sure that when it gives substantive answers to something, it's using only data that we've vetted? And so I think that's one of the approaches to use AI in a maybe more responsible way.
Right. I did a project recently where I pressed some of the biggest tech companies that we all use in our lives, the Facebooks and Instagrams and Googles and Gmails, and I said, okay, which of our data are you using to train your AI models? And some of the answers really shocked me. I don't know if folks know this, but Meta, the company that owns Instagram, took 1 billion of our Instagrams and used them to train an AI on how to make pictures. And they said they had every right to do that because those accounts were set to public, even if that's not necessarily what people had in mind when they were sharing a family photo on Instagram, that it was going to be teaching an AI how to draw a family photo. We've got limited time here, so I want to throw in one more question. Natasha, we received a question from the audience. Wilson Rayron from Brazil asks, what are the philosophical and ethical implications of creating artificial intelligence capable of generating art and literature, challenging your understanding of creativity? Yeah, is this art? What happens to creativity? And you've got a minute.
Yes, okay.
No problem.
Cool. I think that these norms are currently in flux, and that's why we have seen, as I mentioned, those lawsuits. I think that creators, creative people, artists, Hollywood directors, everybody has seen what happened with the last phase of the internet, and they want to be sure that they can talk about how they feel about whether or not this is original, whether or not this is creative, which there has been a lot of pushback against that. But at the same time, a lot of the boosters of these large language models, they have increasingly been talking about these systems as though they're anthropomorphized in some way. So they talk also about the rights of these models to read and access information in the same way that you and I do. So I think
AI rights.
Yes. Always goes right to that. And so I think we're going to see a real battle of worldviews as we try to grapple with what this means and what it means for art, creativity, originality.
Natasha and Will, we're going to have to leave it there. Y'all should read their stuff in the Post. It's incredible. Thank you for joining us today. For the audience, don't go anywhere. Our next guest will be out here in just a few moments.
Thanks, Jeff.
Introduces a real power imbalance when the only people who get to have, get to grade the homework of these companies are the companies themselves. They know everything runs on the data center, it's out of view. The only people who get to see behind the curtain are the tech companies themselves. That's a problem because, as we saw with social media, companies cut corners.
These companies, Microsoft in particular, releasing a ChatGPT demo that behaves kind of like that uncle who shows up to holiday gatherings, has a few drinks, and then just talks confidently about he does not know about. And that's funny at the holidays, but that's not something we should be injecting into our information ecosystem.
Is it funny at the holidays?
Good morning and welcome back to Washington Post Live. For those of you just joining, I'm Christina Passariello, the Deputy Business Editor for Technology and Personal Finance. We are joined on stage today by two amazing women who have really checked the power of technology, which is such an important role as we think about AI and the world that we're heading towards. So we have Frances Haugen, who is the co-founder of Beyond the Screen. Frances, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Happy to be here. And Meredith Whitaker, who is the president of Signal. Thank you so much, Meredith, for being with us.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
So, all right, so let's get going. We are going to tap into your wide-ranging perspectives about the lessons of the last decade and how we take those lessons forward to understand where we're going with AI. Meredith, I'm going to start with you. You have been critical of big tech's data practices of collecting personal data, and of course, Signal is encrypted and does not do that. Tell me how concerned we should be about how those data practices are spilling over into this new generation of AI.
Yeah, well, we should be very concerned, but I think we should expand the frame beyond data practices as a discrete element of a business model that could be changed or regulated to look at the fact that big tech relies on mass surveillance. And this was instantiated in the late 90s when the Clinton administration effectively gave the green light to private companies to commercialize network computation with no restrictions on privacy. So the business model that developed out of this, which Frances has spoken about at length, is this surveillance advertising business model that incentivizes the creation and collection of increasingly invasive data about us, our communities, our worlds, and is now supercharging that voracious appetite for data via this bigger is better paradigm of AI. So, AI is a surveillance technology insofar as it requires this mass surveillance, these huge data sets, and insofar as its application by governments, institutions, and other actors is itself surveillance. It produces data about us. It infers things about us and our communities that in turn create more data, create more information, of course, in the hands of about 5 companies who are the only actors in the world with the infrastructure and data that is required to create these systems. So yeah, we should be concerned, but the concern should go beyond data practices to be concerns about social control, about surveillance apparatuses, and about what can happen to those affordances when they're in the hands of people with malign intent.
And we heard earlier on stage today about how the amount of data that's being used now is, in the past 4 years, has grown 1,000-fold. So we're in this moment with AI where there's greater and greater need for data. Francis, I wanted to ask you, you've said that both social media and AI platforms are driven by opaque technological systems. Tell us what you mean by that.
So if we were to look at something like an iPhone, I've done the search before for Apple whistleblower. I actually kind of chafe at the title the Facebook whistleblower, because there are so many Facebook whistleblowers, like people who've actually brought out more documents than me. You just don't know their names. If you look at Apple, there's very, very few whistleblowers, and I think that's because the incentives to lie are substantially less. Right, if you look at the time between when a new Apple iPhone hits the market and when the first YouTube videos go live of someone taking that phone apart, it's like hours. Like really high quality videos where they're like, this is the chip they said was in there. This lens, that's actually the lens that's in there. People run performance benchmarks on these phones. The incentive to lie is relatively low. Those are more transparent systems. That's what our economy was for the last 200 years. But we're moving into a world, especially as more and more of it is automated, more and more of it is run by AI systems, where the actual mechanics of the product you're buying operate on a data center. You don't get to interrogate it, especially if those experiences are personalized to you or to other people. It means that none of us get to see what a representative experience is. I'll give you even one more little slice, things like ChatGPT. You have a limited number of queries you can do per day. Right? Even if you get a paid account, like my husband uses it to help with coding, and he literally has 2 accounts because he regularly goes through all of his credits on one. And so it's if coding can be a drug, it's like an intermittent reward cycle. You're like, oh, is it going to work this time? Is it going to work this time? Is it going to work this time? AI plus coding, I lose him for 6 hours at a time. But but it's one of these things where, in the hands of researchers, you can't afford to get 1,000 paid accounts if you're an academic. If you only get a few queries a day on free accounts and they're looking for that kind of usage, we have no idea how these systems operate. And what we saw with social media is that if you can cut corners in the dark, people will cut corners in the dark, because, like Meredith said, it's a question of economics. If you have to report your economic balance sheet, but not your social balance sheet, you can take from one to make the other look better.
And so we had Chuck Schumer on stage earlier this morning. Senator Schumer was saying that, the legislative approach is really what's going to help us in the U.S. Meredith, you have advised Lina Khan. Of course, Congress is holding AI hearings and forums, and we heard today that there's going to be another one next week. But you also mentioned the Clinton administration sort of laying the groundwork for all of this data collection. So how optimistic are you that Congress and regulators will tackle these issues today competently, even though they have not passed any major legislation on the last big tech topic they were focused on, which was social media?
Well, they haven't passed a federal privacy bill, and it's been 20-something years, right? So I don't know where optimism would spring from, but it's pretty barren ground. And I think the incentives right now are not aligned for the social good. I think we're looking at billions of dollars in lobbying being thrown by these big tech companies, a full-on media operations campaign that has been documented by tech industry adjacent folks to displace ethical concerns and concerns about the social harms of these systems with, what I would call religious sci-fi fantasies about the singularity and about sort of the super intelligence. So, we are outgunned in terms of lobbying power and in terms of the ability to put our weight on the decision makers in Congress. But where my hope lies for regulation is not with a kind of, Athena birthing from the head of a senator and saying, actually, you need to, do the right thing, but with things like the Writers Guild of America, who have, I think, done the best job we've seen of regulating AI, just non-traditionally. They did the classic move, withholding their labor, and they got terms that are actually, staunching the bleeding of the, use by the studios and big tech to place AI within their labor process in ways that will degrade their labor, that will degrade artistic output, and that will actually, I think have a real precedent-setting move in terms of stopping the real harms right now. So I would look to the Writers Guild of America, I would look to SAG, I would look to drivers unions that are contesting this sort of automated precarity of AI systems like Uber and Lyft. I would look to sort of movements from below that are actually tackling the harms now and not simply sitting around and taking selfies with Elon Musk and calling it a regulatory agenda.
I think one of the things that's going to drive those kinds of changes is, people have talked at length where, there is a skills escalator. You come out of college, you come out of high school, and you have relatively low complexity jobs. And I had lunch with a friend a couple days ago, and she'd been playing around with generative AI, and she's like, I am never going to hire a junior copywriter again. It's amazing. And I looked at her and I was like, amazing for you. Right? In a world where if you are a junior visual designer, you are a junior writer, the jobs, a junior journalist, the jobs that allow you to then become a more sophisticated contributor, they're about to disappear. And if you have enough unemployed young people, you get actions. Society gets destabilized if you have enough unemployed young people.
So clearly, yes, there is going to be huge impact on labor, and we're starting to see that already, right? Just in these hiring decisions that people are making. Now, Francis, companies like OpenAI have asked the US government to regulate them, which recalls the position that Mark Zuckerberg was in with Facebook after many hearings. Do you think that the tech industry has learned the lesson of the last decade about being proactive about the risks of their technology?
It's not even from back when Mark had to testify. If people looked at Facebook's response to 41 states, I always get this wrong, state attorneys general suing Meta on Tuesday, they came back and said, we're very disappointed in the attorneys general because they didn't provide us with a healthy framework. Instead, they did this adversarial thing. And it's you fund lobbyists like NetChoice who go in there and torpedo when people try to regulate things. In terms of learning the lessons, I want to really reiterate on what Meredith said around economics drives action. If you have a business model where there is no transparency, there is no having to report the costs of the social side of the balance sheet, the incentive is to keep cutting corners. And what we've seen, what's actually really disturbed me is OpenAI has been one of the more conscientious players as much as it's still they're not doing enough. Facebook came out and published their model. They leaked the weights of it. It's not a question of 5 companies in the world can do these models. We have AI today in the wild where you can take stuff that is open source and spend hundreds of dollars and make a bot that is going to be able to help you run an information operation. Right? Move fast and break things is immediately being reapplied today. And you mentioned the business models, of course. Yesterday, we reported that the White House is expected to unveil its executive order on AI next week. One of the things that we reported is that the order will require advanced AI models to undergo assessments before they can be used by federal workers. So baking in an economic incentive if you're going to contract with the federal government. What impact do you think that's going to have on how big tech might develop their models? I've seen estimates that say that the market size for generative AI in the next 10 years is going to be on the order of $10 to $12 trillion. With a T. We used to talk about billions, we're talking trillions. And those are modeled off of the idea that for every dollar of productivity you can give a company, they're willing to pay you 20 or 25 cents for it. Right now, we have an opportunity through things like this, or imagine if the Fortune 500 came out and said, you need to meet a certain level of transparency, a certain level of safety bars if you want us to buy from you. Right? That would actually provide economic incentives throughout the creation chain. Because right now you have startups that are getting funded, and you want to have the people who are guiding those startups saying, hey, we need to see proactively what your safety plan is, because we need you to be able to have Fortune 500 companies. We need you to be able to have the federal government to be a client. So I think it's a great step forward.
And Meredith, you of course became notable in part because of your whistleblowing within Google around the ways that the technology was being used. Of course, and how their business incentives sort of dominated over moral and ethical concerns. Now, in this era of generative AI. They talk about being bold and responsible. And of course, they have been a little bit on the back foot, a little bit beat to the market by both OpenAI and Microsoft. How do you see their approach to ethics and morals versus the business balance these days?
Yeah, well, I did do labor organizing at Google, and that was one of the few things that actually checked some of these impulses. So I think, we can talk about business model. We can also talk about capitalism, right? The engines of these companies are driven by a need, a requirement to report revenue and growth increases every quarter forever. That's the definition of metastasis, and it is obviously not healthy for the social benefit. So I think, we do need those structural checks. I think, how is Google doing? Look, remember Web3? Right?
Vaguely.
This was a hype cycle. Everyone was predicting, massive numbers. This is going to change the entire environment. And then, no one's talking about it. Andreessen Horowitz has even moved off it. They're, black holing their optimistic manifestos. I think generative AI is very similar. I don't think AI in general is similar. I think they're going to continue to create these large-scale models that involve data and compute. But generative AI is not actually that useful. What happened in January was that technology, or sort of a framework for building models that had been developed in 2017, was sort of put online with an interface by Microsoft/OpenAI, who have to be understood as the same entity, right? And the ChatGPT interface kind of gave people a simulated experience of oh my God, I'm talking to kind of a human. It's spitting out nonsense, but it's spitting it out, and this feels kind of sentient, right? And on the backs of this advertisement for their GPT API, which they sell through their Azure cloud services, they sort of generated an entire new hyped narrative around generative AI as this sort of future-facing technology that's going to change every industry. But what does it do, right? It, it presents visual images that are often, stolen from artists or far too close for comfort, and it presents plausible text, right? It infers what's the sort of plausible response to a prompt based on, mountains of data from the internet, the Reddits, the 4chans, the Stormfront is in there, as Natasha's work has shown, and kind of presents text that looks plausible but has no relationship to facts, has no relationship to reality, has no citations, right? So what is this useful for? It's not useful in most serious contexts. Yeah, you could replace a junior copywriter, but you better have a senior copywriter who's checking that text because it's going to be janky. So I think we need to be really clear about what are we actually responding to. We're responding to an advertisement, a very expensive advertisement, ChatGPT, that was put online as an interface that allowed us to have a sort of simulated experience with a bot that we're now sort of making all kinds of predictions on that I don't think are actually grounded in any understanding of the utility of these systems. And again, Silicon Valley runs on VC hype. VCs require hype to get a return on investment because they need an IPO or an acquisition, and that's how you get rich. You don't get rich by the technology working. You get rich by people believing it works long enough that one of those two things gets you some money. So we're seeing another one of those.
I think that sentiment is dangerous. Just come in and say, this is irrelevant, this is just a hype cycle. Because we need to remember, companies have spent tens of billions of dollars a year, Fortune 500 companies, tens of billions of dollars a year on teaching their own employees how to write basic emails. We take for granted the fact that most people struggle with communication. And I fully back up the idea that today you can ask basic factual questions to these AIs and they give very, very varying answers, right? At the same time, you can give them bullet points and say hey, I'm struggling to write a first draft of this report. It used to be, you'd have your junior, whoever's your junior person on your team, give a first stab at the report, then I'll edit it. Because it's faster to edit than write the first version. People are just putting in bullet points and they get a first version and they edit it. And so I don't think we should come in and say and remember, technology is exponential, right? If you sit there and say, this is a toy today, I think it is a toy today. But if you say it's a toy today, it keeps getting better. They're getting better at doing things like structured reasoning. We shouldn't just dismiss that this is not going to be a danger in the future.
Just to clarify, hype doesn't mean it doesn't do some things.
Yeah.
Hype means that an entire ecology of sort of, narrative bombast has been sort of predicated on something that, can help you write an email. If that's a problem you want to solve with 20 billion GPUs, you can do it. right? But is that a world-changing problem to solve? And what is the actual sort of, material basis for these, what I would call bombastic claims? So it doesn't mean there isn't GPT certainly does a thing, right? But let's get back down to reality and the actual thing it does before we make all of these predictions based on that.
Let's close with a question about misinformation, because of course, this is something we've touched on briefly here, the drunk uncle problem, I'll say. But these models need more data in order to not produce so much misinformation, is what the companies say. Meredith, what do you respond to that?
Well, these models have no bearing, these models have no understanding of truth or reality. These are probabilistic systems that predict what is likely to be the next word in a sentence, not what is right? You have to bolt facts and truth and citations on post hoc. So it's, this is not a question of, data quantity. This is a question of how do you effectively turn, sort of a statistical system into an expert system, which was sort of, the AI wave before this. AI is a marketing term that's been applied to a lot of different technical modalities. The wave before this was sort of expert systems, where you sort of effectively create a map of the world, and that becomes, the decision tree that the AI follows. This is now sort of, statistically predicting what is likely to happen. You're going to need to bolt on effectively. You're going to have to sort of recreate expert systems to get to that. So I think the data quantity issue is sort of a red herring that is sort of produced, again, or being sort of asserted by the companies whose business model has always been collect all the data as much as we can, more and more and more.
Well,
or surveillance.
Can I give a quick,
a very brief answer? Yes.
Okay. So there's a difference between randomized false truths, right? So this is like the hallucinations from general AI. From generative AI. There's a totally different thing, which is organized information operations. And the thing I am most scared about in the 2024 election is it used to be if you wanted to have lots of different pieces of misinformation, because when you have lots of different, just slightly different pieces of misinformation, it's harder to find the network. You had to pay a huge number of people to write all those different permutations. And we're going to see a thing now where you can turn on your model and say, here's my seed piece of misinformation, my narrative. Give me 1,000 variants. And now I can go test them. I can see which ones go most viral. And that's going to completely change how information operations work. And that is the singular most dangerous thing with misinformation, because it's not going to be randomized. It's going to be in directions that are aligned with whatever the interests are of that information operation.
I mean, I think the TLDR is they're good at producing nonsense, misinformation. They do not produce truth or veracity. So, again, what do these systems do and for whom?
This is a wonderful place to end the conversation, thinking about the real impact that this technology can have on this democratic process we're going to have next year. Meredith and Frances, thank you both so much for taking the time to be with us today. Don't go anywhere, folks. Our next guest will be out here in just a moment. Thank you so much.
AI has the power to automate. But if it's using untrusted data, can you trust the results? Your business doesn't just need AI, it needs the right AI for your business. Introducing Watson X, a platform designed to multiply output by tailoring AI to your needs. When you Watson X your business, you can train, tune, and deploy AI, all with your trusted data. Let's create the right AI for your business with Watson X. IBM, let's create.
So there's been a lot of conversation, smart conversation this morning about rules and regulation and guardrails. We're going to dig a little bit deeper into all of that with Christina Montgomery, who is Vice President and Chief Privacy and Trust Officer at IBM. Great to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
So first, explain this job title, Chief Privacy and Trust Officer. What does that entail?
So I'm responsible for IBM's global programs around privacy. And I'm also responsible for AI governance and data governance for IBM. So we've had a chief privacy officer For almost a quarter of a century now, we were the first company in our industry to have one because we recognized with the birth of e-commerce, personal information was becoming critical and needed to be protected. We, on the ethics side of things, announced principles of trust and transparency around AI 5 years ago now. And their principles like AI should augment humans, not replace them. It should be explainable and fair and private and secure and all those things we're talking about today. And importantly for us, our clients' data belongs to them. So we had those principles, but we needed a way to hold ourselves accountable to them and to build them into practices across our company. So that's what I was tasked with doing, essentially, building an AI ethics board that serves as our centralized decision-making organization around AI ethics. And then, as I said, building those principles into practices across our company and holding our company and every IBMer accountable to those principles.
So we hear this phrase, ethics by design. What does it mean?
Yeah, so ethics by design is sort of at the heart of the way we approach AI at IBM. And if you think, some in this room may be familiar with the concept of privacy by design, sort of thinking from the conception of the development or use of a product, how you can ensure that you are incorporating privacy principles into it, things like data minimization, deletion of data, those types of things, the ability to do that. So when we think about it from an ethics perspective, it's essentially the parallel. It's thinking and ensuring that you are taking ethical considerations into account from the conception of a technology project all the way through the life cycle. So we built a playbook around this internally in IBM with the help of hundreds of IBMers. And it's robust in terms of it not only tells you, okay, if your project, what is the goal of your project, how to consider that, and then from the onset, what you might need to do in light of that. So you need to test for bias. And here, by the way, is a toolkit to do that. So it's the whole roadmap of how you think about and what considerations you need to have from an ethics perspective. When we think about ethics, I'm talking about responsible data use, responsible technology use, transparency, explainability, fairness, those types of things. Not only that you have to do it, but how to think it through. And then what technology, what tools you can use to help you accomplish that.
So IBM has built this structure. Have most companies in the AI space?
I mean, I can't speak for most, but I can say that we've been a leader in sharing as much as possible the practices that we have. Sharing the ethics by design playbook and the approach. We have been one of the leaders in the sort of emergence of an AI governance profession. So a lot of people within the privacy space and in my role are being tasked with responsible AI as well, because really of the programs we've built around managing personal information and managing data. And organizations like, for example, the International Association of Privacy Professionals, which has 80,000 members around the world, has now an AI governance center that is sort of taking these principles that we talked about and teaching people, how do you think about AI governance and how do you manage it? And I sit on their advisory board. We're contributing to the body of knowledge that will teach people how to do this. So we're hoping by sharing our practices, by being transparent, that more and more companies will take it into account.
So there may be people in this room who are thinking of procuring AI for their organizations. What should they look for in terms of privacy and security?
Yeah, so we've seen early on, and if you look at chatbots, for example, last year, some of the earliest cases and concerns were by privacy regulators, right? Saying, you're using personal information in the training of this model and the output of this model and the like. So privacy and security are real concerns when it comes to AI technology because of the ability, what's used in the training and the output. So I think it's important when procuring this technology, any technology in the AI space, any technology in general, to understand the vendor that you're using. You see how easily trust can be lost. And trust is so fundamentally important to any company and to any company brand. So, we have helped with things like in the procurement context, checklists, ask if your vendor is considering things like privacy and security or ethics by design in their practices. What are questions to ask? If it's an HR, for example, solution, are they testing it for bias? What are the practices? So I think it's important not just from a development perspective, but from a procurement perspective to understand the practices of the vendor that you're procuring technology from.
So the EU is ahead of the US when it comes to AI regulation. I'm wondering how important you think it is, given the fact that technology companies are global in many cases, that there be harmonization on these rules and regulations internationally.
So interoperability is something we have been striving to sort of get implemented around the globe as much as possible. I mean, it's important to us as a company that operates in more than 170 countries around the world. And I think it's important for a few reasons. And in part because it will be easier to comply. That's helpful for technology companies, but that should be helpful for, the easier it is to comply, the more likely companies are going to be complying. A company like IBM, we have practices in 170 countries, business in 170 countries. We also have people around the world that can help us to ensure that we're taking all those laws and rules and regulations into account. A lot of companies can't do that. And when you think about artificial intelligence, I mean, by its nature, this technology does not have a border. It is impacting everybody, and it's only fair that people around the world who the technology is being deployed, who are going to be subject to the technology are offered sort of the same benefits associated with that. So I think interoperability is really important, at least at the highest levels in terms of having a common set of values-based principles, having certain practices. So a great example of interoperability that we saw just recently is the United States and Singapore are doing a crosswalk, a mapping of US NIST AI risk management framework and Singapore's AI management framework called AI Verify. And in the end, those comparisons and those crosswalks are going to lead to the adoption of some of the best practices, because we'll take the best from both, right, and apply those. So I think those kinds of conversations make the solutions better for everybody.
So even if there is some sort of international consensus on what the rules should be, there's still rogue actors who aren't going to pay any attention to those rules, right?
There'll always be rogue actors, which is why we need as many guardrails in place as possible. And it's also where these international conversations are so critically important, right? Because the more alignment there is around common values and common principles, the more likely guardrails will be adopted by companies, encouraged by governments, and will protect against harmful uses as much as possible.
The White House is expected to issue its executive order on AI Monday, according to the Washington Post. What are you going to be looking for?
Well, we've been hoping from the onset that the executive order will balance innovation with managing risks. And I'm hopeful and expect that that will, in fact, be the case. The US government is a huge procurer of technology in general, and particularly AI. And this is a real opportunity for the US government to lead in being emblematic in adopting trustworthy and responsible AI principles. So things like pointing to the use of the NIST risk management framework in the procurement of AI systems and solutions, best practices like that, helping to lead in research and to, particularly research in the trust and safety spaces, in helping to not only not only sort of direct what those guardrails should be, but helping to research solutions around them. So, for example, Senator Schumer this morning talked about explainability. And it's not, there is a lot of research that needs to be done There's some best practices around transparency and data and the like, but the more we understand how the models work, the better and the safer that the technology will be ultimately. So more research to be done there, more research to be done in watermarking. So I think encouraging that through something like this executive order will be very beneficial.
Do we need a new federal agency to regulate AI?
So I think every agency should be an AI agency.
But should there be a standalone?
I don't. So personally, I don't believe so. I mean, look, AI is a pervasive technology. Every single one of us is going to have to learn how AI is going to touch the jobs we do today, the jobs we do tomorrow. And the other important part about AI is that the harms, and in IBM, we've been pretty clear from 4 years ago to today in terms of what we think smart regulation looks like. And we've been calling for regulation. Unlike other technology companies, we've been calling for regulation of this technology for 4 years. But we have been asking that the regulation be focused on the use, not the technology itself. Because if you try to regulate the tech, your regulation is going to become very quickly outdated. So to that end, existing regulators understand how the risks of AI technology are playing out in their respective domains. You require that domain knowledge and that domain understanding. For example, you have to understand in the Department of Defense, they're the best able to understand the risks of using AI in defense related scenarios. Same for transportation, same for employment and the like.
Tech companies, including your own, have been involved in discussions with the federal government about AI regulation. What would you say to those people who say, wait a minute, we're putting the fox in charge of the henhouse?
Yeah, so we've been very clear that we don't think the rules of the road for AI should be written by tech companies alone. Certainly, tech companies have an important role to play. In fact, it's our responsibility as the developers of this technology to help to educate policymakers, to educate consumers about how the technology works, what our practices are, and to be leaders in terms of responsibility and accountability. But we've been clear from the onset that we think these conversations have to be multi-stakeholder, multidisciplinary. In fact, I sit on the steering committee for the Partnership on AI, which is a very multidisciplinary organization. It includes civil society, academia, tech companies, and the like. And just, I think it was yesterday or the day before, the Partnership on AI published its own recommendations for the safe deployment and development of foundation models. And the ACLU was at the table. I mean, civil society was at the table. So we think that's really important.
Should there be even closer collaboration than there is now? Or do you think it's just about right?
I mean, I think we're going to see this as much collaboration as possible. So I think a combination of things like the Partnership on AI, things like what we see in the executive order, which hopefully will start, funding and initiating more and more research in the trust and safety spaces. We're heading in the right direction. We weren't having these conversations a year ago. We were asking for them and we were pushing for them, but we weren't seeing them take root, and I think we are now.
Christina Montgomery, Vice President and Chief Privacy and Trust Officer at IBM. Thanks.
Thank you.
And now back to the Washington Post.
It really does mean interrogating the role that technology plays in our lives in the first place, and I think that builds off of principles like accountability, trustworthiness, and transparency.
Welcome back, everyone. My name is Natasha Tiku. I'm a tech culture reporter with the Washington Post, and I'm joined here by Sneha Revanur, who is the founder and president of Encode Justice. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hi, Natasha. I'm so honored to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so let's start with just talking a little bit about young people and their adoption of this technology. What have you been seeing, like among your peers at school with generative AI and ChatGPT?
Yeah, it's been astonishing. I mean, I've been working in this AI space for around 3 years, so obviously not nearly as long as some of the titans we see today, but still long enough to really notice and feel the impacts of this dramatic shift in how my generation is thinking about and using AI. I mean, all within the last year. People have gone from probably not thinking about it very much at all to AI now having a name and a face and really showing up in everyday conversations. I recall the first time my friend told me that she had used ChatGPT to write a text to a guy who had ghosted her. And I think my reaction probably caught her off guard because I was like, oh my God, I have been waiting for this. You have no idea how much this excites me to hear these words even being uttered outside the bubble. And that was probably not the reaction she was expecting, but nonetheless, it was so exciting and encouraging. And I mean, we've gone from probably last year, my friends and peers would have been like, oh, this is Sneha, she does this AI thing, I couldn't really tell you what it is, she just like skips class and goes to DC sometimes. And now people are actually walking up to me on campus and they're asking questions and they're expressing genuine concern about just how far-reaching AI has become in our daily lives. And to me, that is so encouraging. I mean, my peers are wondering whether AI is surveilling us, whether AI is going to render their dream job obsolete, how social media algorithms are impacting their mental well-being, whether they're encountering deepfakes, whether there could be an AI catastrophe, and obviously just how creepy Snapchat's My AI feature was earlier this year. I mean, that was crazy. So I think that it's awesome to see that people are beginning to pay attention, and I think that is the launching pad for meaningful public discourse.
And how quickly have you seen like people's behaviors, like using ChatGPT to text a guy who ghosted you? How are people adapting to the everyday uses of it? Like, does it feel, I guess, suffused in your like daily life?
Yeah, I think it definitely has been a slow shift, but I think it's for sure taking place. I think the first time that I really heard people talk about it was probably late last year, in November and December, when I think the initial hype and hysteria around ChatGPT was taking off. And I think that at this point, it's become a fixture of almost everyday conversation, which has been crazy to me. I know, for example, we've seen how a word like Google has become, a dictionary word, and we've seen that become used as a verb. And I think now we're seeing ChatGPT enter everyday speech to almost a similar degree. And I think, yeah, it definitely has been something that has taken place over the last year and has been ramping up. But I think now it's really playing a critical role in our lives, and that's been astonishing. I mean, people are obviously using it, in the ways that I described to, write breakup texts and, confront guys, and, all sorts of things, but I think people are also using it for meaningful academic uses. People are, using it to boost productivity. People are using it to actually learn and to engage with new content. There are positive uses. There are also risks, of course. We have encountered the issue of hallucinations, as they've called it, from ChatGPT, and the risk of disinformation. And of course, who knows the impact that generative AI could have on the workforce, whether, like I mentioned before, it could render some of our dream jobs entirely obsolete. So there's a whole host of challenges resulting from this, but I think people are finally becoming a bit cognizant of it.
And can you talk to us a little bit more about Encode Justice, why you founded it, and how the organization has transformed over the past few years?
Yeah, of course. I mean, things have obviously just taken off in the AI world as a whole over the last couple of years, but actually, when I was in high school, I came across an investigation conducted by ProPublica that uncovered pretty staggering rates of racial bias in an algorithm that was being used to determine whether or not a defendant should be released or detained before their trial. And that the machine bias expose is now treated as a seminal expose, kind of exposing algorithmic bias, and a lot of people view that as an entry point into the space. And actually, a couple of years after that, in 2020, I came across a ballot measure in my home state of California that sought to enshrine the use of very similar software statewide in place of the already flawed system of cash bail. And analysts actually thought that the measure was almost guaranteed to pass because it was backed by the political establishment in California and the billionaire developers of courtroom algorithms, and that's how I knew that I wanted to get involved. And so I rallied my peers, and together we hosted town halls, created informational content, called voters, and really tried to get the word out about the fact that these algorithms could actually be dangerous. And I think that we actually were able to make a big splash and ended up defeating the measure by around a 13% margin. And that was actually just the first initiative, and at that point we became this larger organization, ENCODE Justice, and now we're a global movement of around 900 high school and college students working to imagine a human-centered AI future. And I think that, like I mentioned before, a lot of that interest has been a product of the changing times. There's been a lot more interest in AI over the last year, but nonetheless, it's been so heartening, I think, to see how many more young people are beginning to pay attention and want to get involved.
Yeah, could you talk a little bit about well, first of all, Sneha and I met, I don't know, like maybe 6 months ago, and the amount that she has accomplished in the past 6 months, like if you didn't know her before, you will see her again and again. And when you and I talked, you guys were still really focused on facial recognition and a lot of these inequalities that members of ENCODE Justice had experienced at their own school, and now the conversation has been dominated by generative AI. How are you navigating those two competing policy goals that you're very interested in?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that there, as you mentioned, has really been a dramatic shift over the last year, and that has led to a shift in my outlook as well. I think that what stands out to me is that we're seeing a lot of infighting right now in the AI community in terms of where exactly energy and resources should be allocated. We have people who want to focus solely on confronting short-term immediate risks, and that's obviously critical work because we're seeing algorithmic bias, we're seeing disinformation, we are seeing discrimination, surveillance, all of these challenges that we're face to face with already. And then we're seeing people who would rather focus on catastrophic risks and potential threats posed by AI that maybe we haven't actually seen yet or that haven't been fully realized yet. And the issue is that people are viewing these two priorities as competing. People have this zero-sum view of AI governance that I frankly don't think needs to exist, because in reality, we can and should act to both confront the harms that we're already face-to-face with today and to anticipate the threats of tomorrow that we may not see yet, but that could be possibly devastating. And actually, this summit is fantastically timed, or maybe our statement was fantastically timed, because we released a statement actually just yesterday with the Future of Life Institute, which obviously is a nonprofit focusing almost exclusively on the catastrophic potential of AI. And we called for the policy solution of creating an AI licensing regime and pretty vocally rejected this false choice between immediate threats and future harms. And so I think that it's really, really important now more than ever, since we have lawmakers looking to experts as kind of a North Star to guide policy discussions around AI. We're seeing, for example, Majority Leader Schumer, who was just speaking here earlier today, convening the set of expert insight forums to gather input and to guide the path forward. Now more than ever, they're looking to experts in search of coherent messaging. And I think that my fear right now is that if we just evolve into infighting, if we just devolve into factions, then none of us are going to get what we want at all. And that's going to result in a scenario where we have to pay the steep cost of inaction, and we're both unable to confront existing harms, and we could be on the brink of even more catastrophic ones. And so I think that my call to action right now, and I think this applies both to lawmakers and to those in the AI community, is to really end that infighting. And I think that that's a perspective that we've adopted as well, in terms of we see ourselves as being capable of focusing on both sets of priorities.
And could you talk a little bit about just the importance of young people having a voice in this legislation? I mean, we're seeing, now recent efforts to talk about kids and social media. It's been around for 15, almost 20 years. Can you talk a little bit about, just how strongly your members feel about this and what they want to, the message to lawmakers, I guess?
Yeah, it is so important, Natasha. There's no generation before ours that truly understand what it's like to grow up in a world where the information that we're exposed to, the perspectives that we're consuming, to an extent even our self-concept, is almost algorithmically curated because of the extent to which we've engaged with social media platforms. It truly has impacted, every aspect of our existence, and we've grown up in that reality as opposed to generations before us that, had that introduced them at a much later point in their lives. And so because of that, I think we have this unique perspective and we have this credential of lived experience that I think is so valuable in these conversations about AI regulation. And so even though a lot of us are, sometimes off-put by the amount of technical jargon and complexity relating to AI, in the past, we tended to view AI as this abstract phenomenon that was just beyond comprehension, something dawning upon us in the distant future, but, not actually present in the here and now. I think it's really important that we shed that view and that we get involved in these conversations because we need meaningful democratic control of AI to really steer it in the right direction. We need broad public participation, and it's my generation of digital natives that needs to really take up the mantle and join those conversations and join those efforts. And so I think that lawmakers should be willing to hear from us, again, given that lived experience that we have, but also my generation, my peers should be willing to, I think, look past sometimes, I think, how intimidating these conversations can be and realize that they are just as entitled to a place in the conversation as any academic or any PhD or any, congressional veteran.
Right. We just have time for one last question, and I'd love to hear about, growing an organization to 900 people is a phenomenal achievement. And could you talk a little bit about what, as you've seen more young people get engaged, what has been the catalyst for their engagement, for getting over the hump of the technical jargon and maybe feeling like you don't have a voice, you're too young to be part of a policy conversation? How are you seeing people come to the organization?
Yeah, I think that there are a couple of ways in which we've been able to make that take place. I think the first one is, again, really highlighting that AI is already influencing daily life and that it's not this distant phenomenon that people can't even begin to conceive of. I mean, I always bring up this example and I use this to illustrate just how impactful AI is, but let's say that you're applying for a job, there could be an algorithm that is determining what jobs you are even shown in the first place and which jobs you're even applying to. And there could also be an algorithm that once you actually apply is reviewing your resume. And we obviously have seen some instances of algorithmic bias and systems that have been deployed by leading companies in making those decisions. At the same time, let's say that you are standing trial, there could be an algorithm that is evaluating you and your criminal risk that you are posing as a defendant. Let's say you're moving around in a public space, there are facial recognition cameras that could be monitoring your movements and that could be used to track down your identity. It really is impacting us on every level, and it's to an extent where it's now inescapable. And of course, as we're also grappling with these conversations around larger scale catastrophic risk, I mean, really none of us are able to be exempt from the harms of AI. It's really going to deeply impact what our shared future could look like. And so I think that because we've been able to make that claim, because we've, I think, also been able to use these conversations around generative AI as an entry point to bring more and more folks into the fold, I think that for the first time, young people are beginning to see this as an issue that is both proximate to their lived reality and also more and more accessible because we are trying to make those connections crystal clear between AI that we're hearing about in an abstract sense and AI that's actually being used in the real world. So I think that's been really, really valuable. And also, of course, I think that there are so many ways to get involved. I mean, we have youth who have backgrounds in computer science and who, are learning coding and have that technical credential, and they come at this issue with that perspective because they want to, for example, head into the tech force and become developers themselves who are a lot more socially conscious and who are thinking a lot more about how to build responsible technology. And then we also have youth who have backgrounds in advocacy and who have worked on adjacent issues or who have worked in climate activism or worked in gun violence prevention or similar issues where we've seen a lot of youth engagement. And now they're looking at this and they're like, this could be the next great challenge of our time, and this could be the next great challenge that young people are really being called on to take part in. And so I think that because it's an issue where people from so many different backgrounds and vantage points can really get involved, whether that's, again, people who have a background in computer science or people who have a background in policy and advocacy or people who are creatively minded and want to help us, reshape public narratives around AI, there's really a place for everyone to get involved and for everyone to apply their unique skills. And I think that's really what's brought so many youth into the conversation. So yes, very, very encouraging stuff.
Well, I think that's a great place to end it. Thank you so much for joining us today, Sneha.
Thank you so much, Natasha.
Stay tuned. Our next guest will be out here shortly.
Thank you.
every nation is racing to use AI to build a future that is imbued with their own values. And I think we can all agree that we do not want to live in a future that is defined by technology shaped by authoritarian regimes. And that's why the president is very clear that American leadership in the world today requires American leadership in artificial intelligence.
Well, welcome back. I'm Kat Zakreski, National Tech Policy Reporter here at The Post. And my guest today is Arati Prabhakar, the Director of the Office of Science and Technology Policy at the White House. Thank you so much for joining us today.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me, Kat.
Well, I want to dig right in because we had some news yesterday. My colleagues and I reported that the White House is preparing to release its long-awaited AI executive order on Monday, and that this will be one of the administration's most significant efforts to address AI safety and competition. What does the White House hope to accomplish with this executive order?
Well, let's step back and talk about why we're focused on AI at the White House. The president has been clear from the beginning that this is one of the most consequential technologies of our times. You've heard President Biden talk about the fact that we're at an inflection point in history, and he sees AI as part of that. And just as that clip was showing, if the decisions we make about AI right now are going to shape the future for many, many decades ahead. That's why it's a major focus, and that's why the objective has been clear from the beginning for all of our work. And that objective is to wrestle with the risks, to manage and mitigate the risks, so that we can seize the great opportunities that AI provides. And that's what's behind all the work that we're doing in the White House.
And so we've seen a flurry of activity from the White House on AI, certainly the pledges from companies. And I wanted to ask you, we've seen this voluntary effort, but is that enough? What do we need in terms of executive action at this stage?
Yeah, of course it's not enough. And again, look, let's start by understanding this is a very powerful technology. It's very broad. It's moving really rapidly. And in a moment like this, everyone needs to step up and meet their responsibilities and their obligations. Part of the work that we did started in May when we invited 4 CEOs of leading AI companies to come to the White House. The vice president had an extended meeting with them. The president dropped by for a brief chat as well. And the focus of that meeting, the vice president said it about as clearly as you can possibly say it. She said to them, you have not just a legal but a moral responsibility to make sure that your products are safe before they go out in the world. And that May meeting was the beginning of a series of activities that led to now a total of 15 companies signing up with voluntary commitments that are things like agreeing that they're going to test their products and subject them to independent red teaming before they release them out into the world. They've signed up to help work on watermarking and the technologies that you need to make sure that people can distinguish whether content that they're looking at is generated by AI. And these are important steps. They don't fully solve the problem, but that's companies stepping up to their responsibilities. We're continuing to work with Congress on a bipartisan basis, as you heard from the majority leader earlier today. We're working with our international allies and partners. But while we're doing all of that, we also know the executive branch needs to step up to our responsibilities. And some of that has started with companies, with different agencies and departments doing, just in the course of their work, they're making some important strides. There have been a whole series of announcements about that. And then starting a few months ago, the White House said, and most recently the president said that he would be signing an executive order. He said he's committed publicly to signing it this fall. And that is, the whole point of that is to take a broad look across government and really figure out what are all the actions that we can take to meet this AI moment, to get AI right under existing law. And that's the kind of work that's underway today.
And on that point, one of the areas that I know is top of concern for you in the White House is AI talent. What do you view as some of the biggest barriers to AI talent coming to the United States today? And what steps can the White House take to address that?
Yeah, I think this is layers and layers. So number one, if we're going to do what we need to do as a country to get AI right, we need kids in school getting the STEM backgrounds that they need to be able to participate in the AI revolution. It's going to be everything from creating new generations of AI to using the technology in intelligent and really responsible ways. So we need our own kids stepping up. We need to make sure the doors open for all the talent that wants to come to America from around the world. And that's to get it in the country. And then the other thing, of course, that we think a lot about is how do we get the talent that we need in public service? And, you know, a decade ago, I was the director at DARPA, and there I was in the Defense Department and trying to hire the smartest people I could get a hold of to come in and run amazing programs there. And it's never easy inside of government because most of these high-tech jobs in particular can't be, we can't compete on directly head-to-head on salary. At DARPA, I was often trying to recruit people who had job offers for substantially more than I could pay them. But I got great people, and the reason was the call to public service and the chance to do something big that really mattered for the country and for the world. And so you'll see us focusing on pushing for that kind of great talent to come into the government as well.
And in addition to that, there's also been a lot of concern about immigration barriers to attracting the best AI talent. What steps can the Biden administration take to address those concerns?
Yeah, I mean, this is an ongoing issue, and it's been true for high-tech workers in general, and now this AI moment comes on top of that. And you know, maybe just to put it in a personal context, I'm the child of immigrants who came here in the early '60s from India, and we have seen wave after wave of people coming from around the world who have helped build everything that this country is able to do. And I think we just need to recognize that something that's good for the world but makes it harder for us is that people have a lot more opportunity around the world today, and that really says we have to step up our game to make sure that we're not just sort of like leaning back and say, sure, show up if you want to. We need to be really clear that we welcome people and make it easier for them to get here.
And in addition to the concerns about talent and keeping America competitive, there's also worries about the safety of some of these AI systems. And from our reporting, I understand that NIST will be taking a leading role in red teaming AI models used by the federal government. Why is NIST the right agency to take on this work?
Yeah, so let's talk about NIST first, and then I want to put the work of safety in a bigger context. NIST is the National Institute of Standards and Technology. It's another organization that I once got to run. That was way back in the Clinton administration when my hair was still black. But their mission is unchanged over 100 years now, which is to provide the measurement standards, the technical foundation, the infrastructure that we need for everything across our economy. And what that means in information technology and in areas like AI is standards, practices, test beds, standard methodologies. They provide a technical foundation and benchmarks, but they work very closely with the private activities that set standards as the developers and companies and universities come together. So that's happened across every industry you could think of in our economy, and they are starting now to build out their capacity to do that for the things that are building on AI. And that's work that they are stepping up to. They put out a risk management framework in the last many months. That's one important, that's just table stakes to be serious about AI, and there's much more work to do ahead. And so then the question is, well, what is it we're testing and trying to figure out what AI is good for? And I think I really want to come back to the breadth of this technology. So, step back and think about this for a minute. What AI is, we've all seen the generative AI, the chatbots, the image generators. That's one part of this AI revolution that we're in. What AI is, this generation is about computing capabilities that people train on data. And then once they've trained it on data, they use it to make statistical estimates of all sorts. That's how your chatbot works. It's how, it's what's behind self-driving cars. It's every interaction you have in the online environment, every ad that gets served up to you. So that's what's going on. And if you think about it, we created this information age, the number of different kinds of data to train AI systems on. It seems like it's boundless. It's every click you do online. It's sensor data, scientific data, administrative data, financial data. It's language, it's images, it's video. So what that means is that this is an extraordinarily broad technology, and every one of its applications has bright sides and dark sides, and every one of its applications, you have to peel back the layers and figure out, is this technology safe? Is it going to come off the rails? Is it trustworthy? Is it going to do the things that I really need it to do and stay within guardrails? And is it effective? Is it actually going to be accurate? Is it going to give me, the results that I really need to do my work? That's the work that has to be done. And it's easy to say we need to know that AI is safe and trustworthy and effective before we use it. All of our ambitions for getting this right are founded on the idea that we're going to know before we use it. And yet we're just barely starting to have the tools and methods to be able to do that. The way I think of it is it's sort of like medicine before we had clinical trials. I could sell you any potion I liked, and I don't know, it could be good for you, it could be a disaster. And clinical trials are not perfect, but they allowed us to reap the benefit of pharmaceuticals. And that's where we need to get to with the tools and methods for safe and trustworthy and effective AI. NIST is going to have a huge role to play along with the industry and the research community.
And on that point about tools and methods and NIST's role, does the agency currently have the personnel and funding that it needs to be able to take on some of the world's most powerful AI models?
Yeah, this is a question for everything that we and every other, every company is asking that question, universities are asking that question, and across government we're asking that question. And I think the answer is we're all going to be building. And I know from my experience at NIST that, first of all, they start with a cadre of really deep, smart, technical people. And one of their great gifts is that NIST has a long tradition of over 100 years of working very closely outside of its own walls. It's not just looking inside their own four walls. That means working with companies across industries and working with the academic community. And so that's how they will start, but they and many others are going to be doing a lot of work to build the capacity that we need.
And on that point of capacity, Senator Schumer was here earlier today, and he talked about how there are limits to what can be done by executive action and how there's a need for congressional activity here as well. What do you think Congress's priorities should be as they try to grapple with the threat of artificial intelligence?
Yeah. We've had a great conversation on a bipartisan basis with Congress. And of course, the majority leader is completely correct. We are going to make really significant progress with the work that we're doing from the executive branch. No question about that. And no question that much more will be needed. And I've just had such a good set of discussions with people on Capitol Hill over the course of these months, basically since early this calendar year, when all of a sudden everyone was seeing chatbots. It really sparked the right kinds of conversations. And just as an example, I got to participate in the majority leader's session that he hosted on national security, part of his learning series. And that was a classified discussion, no mics, no cameras, and over half the Senate in a room really focused on what are the hard issues here. And the quality of the questions and the quality of the thinking, I think, I felt really good about. But again, the breadth of the technology, the number of tasks to manage the risks, the number of tasks to figure out how to use it. The market's going to find all kinds of great ways to use it for all kinds of purposes. But in government, we need to be grabbing this amazingly powerful technology and finding really responsible ways to use it to do the country's work. We talked, of course, about the military and the intelligence community's use of it. My colleagues at that session talked about that. But there's so much more, because if you think about every single way that the government interacts with citizens to provide services, those are places where AI is going to make us, the potential to make that work far better is there. If you think about vitally important services like weather forecasting and predicting where extreme weather is going to happen as climate continues to change, that is something that is it's breathtakingly hard, and we're not able to do it with enough fidelity to really inform personal decisions that are so essential. That's a problem that AI is going to help us fundamentally changed. And if you think about the therapies that we need, the way we want to address public health to change health outcomes, I could give you an endless list of the things that we need AI for. So there's a lot of work to do, sorting out those priorities and then figuring out how to resource government to be able to step up. I think those are the conversations that I hear when I talk to people on Capitol Hill, and I think there's a lot of work to be done, and I'm really glad to see the level of engagement and interest.
And on that point, Director Prabhakar, I wanted to ask you about the threat from China. Certainly, there's been a lot of attention on this, and I was curious, do you think we are currently in a digital Cold War with China?
That's a great question. Well, look, we live in a time in which geopolitical tensions with China have ratcheted up, and the China that the world sees today is not the China of 10 or 15 years ago, due to a series of actions that they've taken. And I think we just have to be very realistic that there will always be global problems like climate change that we must work with China on. And at the same time, we are competing economically, and we are working very hard to deter and make sure that we can defeat military action, which we hope never comes to pass. So that is the reality that we're in. And I think for AI, it really comes back to the fact that this powerful, broad technology is everyone around the world is grabbing it to use it to build the future that they think expresses their values, right? I mean, who wouldn't be doing that? It's such a powerful capability. And that's going to look different in authoritarian regimes. And we have so many disagreements in this country about so many things. The one thing everyone agrees on is we do not want to live in that future that is shaped by technologies that have been driven by authoritarian regimes. And I think that to me is the fundamental reason that American leadership, if we are going to lead in the world, as we must lead in AI. That's part of this moment. That's really what underpins everything that we're doing. And that means we have to get it right for the American people, and we have to continue to work with our allies and partners because we want to get it right for the world.
On that point about America leading on AI, China already has rules for generative AI systems. The European Union is getting close to legislation governing AI. Next week, the UK is hosting its major AI summit. Yeah. Are we falling behind these other countries?
Yeah, I don't think we're falling behind. And in fact, I think we are working closely with our like-minded allies. The Vice President just announced that she's participating in that AI summit in the UK as an example. There are a host of other dialogues that are going on, including a G7 dialogue, work that Secretary Raimondo is doing with the US-EU Trade and Technology Council. So all of those conversations are going on. And I think the challenge that we are all facing together is with this very fast-moving, very broad technology, how do we get this right? How do we shape the way regulations are enacted and enforced? How do we build the capacity to test and to know what these AI technologies are actually doing? How do we seize it to use it for all of the benefits that can come? And how do you do that? You're riding this bucking bronco with this technology. And I think that's the challenge. And I think the course that we are on, the president was clear from the beginning, starting early this year, that we were going to move with urgency to get it right. And if you look at the series of actions that we've taken, working with the companies on voluntary commitments, the actions that a lot of our agencies and departments have already mentioned, the EO that the president has said he's going to sign this fall. And then in parallel with that, we also had announced previously that the Office of Management and Budget is putting out guidance for how the government uses AI. And that is a very big deal, because getting that right is a tremendous opportunity for leadership. So when you look at that slate, followed by legislation, we hope close behind, I think we are really in a very strong position.
Do you have an update on when we can expect that guidance from OMB on how the government uses technology?
That's been working in parallel with the EO, and I expect that too will be soon. That'll be good.
Got it. And I wanted to ask you, because you brought up the UK AI Summit, and we were just talking about the tensions of both competing with China and how there are areas where the US needs to work with China, like on climate. Do you agree with the UK's decision to invite China to their AI summit next week?
I thought it was a great process that they went through to figure out how to convene the right people at the right table. And look, absolutely, we always want to make sure that there's good dialogue going on with every part of the world. And so I thought that was a terrific idea, and I think that we'll all see how those conversations play out.
And on that point of the AI summit, the UK has signaled that they're going to focus heavily on so-called existential threats from artificial intelligence. Do you think that that is the right place to focus at this one-time gathering of global leaders and companies?
Well, I think they've been very clear that they've chosen that out of a whole plethora of issues that are important for AI. But I think we should talk about this because, look, I mean, everyone who's involved with AI, if you are in a company, if you're an academic researcher, if you are part of a civil society organization, people tend to come at it from one particular perspective. And that's actually the richness of this technology. But what that means is that it sometimes sounds like a cacophony of people saying, no, this is, the issue is bioweapons, or over here someone's saying, no, the issue is this kind of bias that's embedded in algorithms, and someone else is saying, no, it's our information environment is getting trashed by misinformation. So, and other people are concerned about jobs. Every one of those concerns is real. Some are going to manifest early, some are going to manifest later. Some of them can lead to abrupt and massive crises and on a short time frame. Others are going to play out over months or even years, but can also be equally devastating. And I think it's so important that people focus on the things that they are passionate about. But for the work that we're doing from the White House, we are the United States of America. We don't just work on one problem at a time. If we're going to get AI right for our country and for the world, we have to keep all of those risks and challenges in frame. And that is exactly what we have done from the beginning, and you'll see that continue in our work.
But obviously, as much as you can keep all of those in frame, you have to set priorities too. I mean, do you think that there has been too much focus on some of these existential risks? Is it distracting at all from the problems already with artificial intelligence?
No, I really just don't see it as a competition. The things that you need to do to deal with bias and algorithms for mortgage lending decisions, there are a set of things to do, and there are people who have responsibilities in that area. Often there are laws and regulations that are already on the books, and figuring out how to step up to a moment where AI could be exacerbating those risks or making it harder to find those instances of bias. That's something you go do over here. Biorisks are real, and by the way, they were real even before this generation of AI came along, simply because of the advances in biological technologies. And figuring out what to do about that requires taking a systems view of that problem and understanding the biological tools as well as the AI tools, and then figuring out how you minimize our risk and our exposure. So I find when you really look at what the specific problems are, the levers that are available and the ways to proceed are really quite different, and they all need to be addressed because, AI simply won't work if we don't manage all of it, and we're capable of doing that.
And so looking at those problems, I wanted to ask you, what keeps you up at night as someone who has been working on this technology for years? What are you most concerned about?
I do lie awake at nights sometimes thinking about it, because I think probably the biggest reason I worry is because of we keep talking about the technology, right? This is really about human beings. It's human beings that build these systems. It's human beings that decide what to train them on. It's human beings that decide what to let them connect to in the rest of the world, or what kind of autonomous functions they might have. It's human beings that choose how to use AI systems. And if you think the machines are complex and opaque and hard to understand, think about the human beings for a minute. And the creativity and the ability for humans to do amazing things, shocking things, terrific things and horrible things, that's what keeps me up at nights. But I'll tell you, I do, so it is on my mind, but I wake up optimistic because I think we are going to make such significant progress with this very focused work that we're doing. And the president's just been clear, we have to get this right. And what you'll see as we do the actions that have already taken place, the EO, the OMB guidance, all of which is to come, with all of that in place, I think you will really see a broad, cohesive, comprehensive approach to getting AI right. And that's a good reason. That's a good feeling in the morning when I wake up. So.
Well, Director, we're just about out of time, so I think we'll have to leave it there on that happy note. Thank you so much for joining us today at Post
Really
Live.
appreciate it.
And thank you for joining us today at Post Live. That concludes our AI Summit. We hope that you'll continue to follow along with our Post Live conversations and our future coverage of this issue. And for those of you here in the room, I hope that you'll join me just through those doors for lunch after this. Thank you.